remember coming into the house on one cold winter's night. The snow and icy wind blew through the front door as I stepped into the house, kicking my boots clean. I noticed a strange odor in the place. It almost smelled like stink bugs with notes of copper and bleach. I hated the smell of stink bugs. "Hey honey," I said. "Where are you? I'm starving, and by the way, it smells weird in here. Traffic nearly stopped for half hour on I-80. A goddamn tractor trailer flipped over the middle of the blizzard and closed down all 3 lanes. We could only get around by driving in the breakdown lane until cops got there and started..." My voice trailed away as I noticed the drops of blood on the floor leading from the front hallway into the kitchen. I stopped talking immediately, looking around for signs of an intruder. I saw nothing. No smashed windows, no busted doors, no rifle through drawers or cabinets. "Oh my god," I whispered, immediately going to the kitchen and grabbing the largest meat cleaver I could find from the knife block. Its edges gleamed, freshly sharpened and ready to slice into the hardest of flesh. I made sure not to step on the drops of blood. I didn't want to disturb a crime scene, if indeed it was a crime scene. I stopped, thinking of calling 911, but some inner voice urged me on. It will take 5 or 6 minutes for the police to arrive, possibly longer, it said, and you need to check on your family now. Right now. Sprinting forwards, I followed the blood trail down the hall and straight to the first floor bathroom. The door stood closed. I tried the handle and found it locked. "Hello?" I said, pounding on the door. "Who's in there? Open up!" "Isaac, is that you?" a faint voice asked. I recognized the voice of my wife immediately. "Open the goddamn door!" I screamed. Rising waves of anxiety and adrenaline coursed through my body, and I immediately knew something was very wrong. I could hear it in the dead tone of my wife's voice, see it glistening on the floor in crimson droplets, feel it in the air like falling pressure before a thunderstorm. "Jenna, open the door." I heard some slight shuffling in the small bathroom, like someone dragging themselves across the floor. Then, I heard a click. I opened the door and found a chamber of nightmares lying beyond the threshold. My only son floated face down in the bathtub. My wife sat back down on the edge of the tub, rocking back and forth, her eyes flat and dead. "Why?" I whispered, horrified. "Why would you do this?" "Don't you know?" she murmured in a croaking tone. "Do you really not know that our son is the Antichrist?" Maybe I did have suspicions that something wasn't quite right with Max. It was more than the dead animals I kept finding strewn around the yard and under the house. It was more than the way his eyes seemed to shine in the dark when I wished him good night. No, it was a feeling, a cold, empty feeling that seemed to follow him wherever he went. He had no friends at school, and animals avoided him like the plague. Dogs would start barking and howling when he walked down the street, and cats would hiss then disappear with a swish of their tail in a flash behind bushes or up trees. These things on their own wouldn't be too much evidence of anything, but they were far from the only evidence that Max was unusual. A month ago, a couple of boys had tried to bully Max at school. They ran out of the bathroom where it happened, crying and wetting their pants as blood streamed from their noses and ears. They wouldn't tell anyone what happened, and Max just kept smiling and staring at them with his large, dark eyes. The school called an ambulance, and the doctors were baffled. They had to sit in the emergency room for 3 hours before the blood stopped pouring out of their bodies. They were white as sheets by the time it finally clotted, and the doctors had no idea of the cause. The two boys went missing a few days later. The case ended up drawing media attention. The FBI came in, but they found absolutely nothing. It seemed like the boys just disappeared out of their windows, and then the trail immediately went cold. Tracking dogs couldn't find a hint of a trail. It was as if they had teleported from their bedrooms. Moreover, no neighbors had seen a thing. A couple months later, a few hikers found the boys' fingers growing out of a tree on the Appalachian Trail, over 50 miles away. The FBI swooped in and used DNA testing to determine that these fingers belonged to the missing boys from Max's school. No one ever explained how the rotting fingers had become quite literally fused into the tree, however. No one ever tried to bully Max again after that. In fact, the other kids gave him as much distance as possible. I tried to watch Max when he didn't know I was looking. He was only an 8-year-old boy, but he could put on masks like a psychopath and charm nearly anyone he met. As soon as they turned away though, he would scowl and narrow his eyes as if he wanted to stab them in the back. But this was my son after all. I loved him, and I think he loved me in his own strange way. Even my wife said she loved him, and she claims that's why she had to kill him. A strange kind of love, I admit. But I don't think she's lying. I think she did love him, and she feared what would happen when his ascension had finished, and he sat on a throne of bones, crushing out the lives of millions of people with an iron heart. She feared the consequences for him, she said. Only for him, and she loved him, and so she had to kill him and stop it now before it grew into a grinding juggernaut that devoured his soul and sent him to hell. "Are you my true father?" Max had asked me that morning as I sat at the kitchen table. I put down my coffee cup slowly, with shaking hands, then turned to look at my son. "Yeah, of course," I said with a trembling voice. "Why would you ask such a crazy question?" He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes so dark they looked black. They blazed with an inner light. His pale white skin looked as smooth as a statue's, and dark hair fell over his chiseled features. If it weren't for his aloofness and cruelty, he would have been a very beautiful boy. Instead, he radiated a coldness like the moon, an aura that gave light but no heat, a kind of reptilian psychopath detachment that extended to everything he did. He would laugh when he saw fatal car accidents on the highway or heard news reports about wars and murders. "I don't think you are my true father," Max said, still staring at me, reading me like a book. I felt myself begin to sweat. "Max, that's ridiculous," I said. "Your mother and I have been married." "Then where does my power come from?" he asked. "Why do I possess what you will never? I know I'm related to Mother." He spat out the word as if it were a filthy thing. Mother. But you, I know not where my divinity comes from. You seem weak and foolish to me. At least Mother has the courage to admit that she hates me. You grovel and pretend, and then, when my back is turned, you sneer at me and my ascension. I know you do. You are a last man like many others. Your kind is irredictable as fleas, hopping all over the world without meaning or the will to power. You can never understand someone like me. Not in a million years. "I don't understand what all this business about ascension is," I said. "I think you're living in a fantasy world." "If it were a fantasy world," he said, "then the fruit would not be revealed. But it will be. Soon everyone will see, including you. I'll be with my true father and become the absolute king of this world. Small men like you will grovel like worms. They'll be crushed under my feet as I rise to heights previously undreamed of as part of my becoming. My greatness will shine like the second sun. People will remember my name with awe and terror for 1,000 years. He spoke like a much older boy. I gawked at him with an open mouth. He had a faraway look in his eyes, a fanatical gleam that sharpened his cold features. I remembered when Max was just a little boy. Did I know it back then, when I watched him play with his toys? Did I know what he was? I think I would have run screaming from the room if I had. Max turned and left the room, grabbing his backpack as the school bus pulled up in front of the house. I watched him go. He walked with the confidence and straight back of a soldier. And yet, I thought I saw an aura of swirling black shadows around him. I blinked, and like mist under the hot summer sun, he dissolved into the air. I looked away, sweating and shaking. With trembling hands, I tried to pick up the coffee. It immediately fell to the floor in my nervous fingers and shattered. 50 minutes later, I was working from home when the first of the ambulances and police cars raced by, heading to Max's school. My neighbour, a teacher at the school who the kids called Mr. Hallen, told me the story from his viewpoint later that day. I don't know how much I believed. At the time, maybe none of it. Now, all of it. The day started normally enough, Mr. Hallen said, pushing his oversized glasses up on his long, nerdy face. The kids started streaming in for homeroom, then the bell rang. I started preparing my lecture notes for the first period. That was when the screaming started down the hallway. It sounded like a girl being murdered. Just an endless, pain shrieking that went on and on and on. Abruptly, it cut off, and everything went deathly silent. The students all looked at each other, nervous. A hissing voice came over the intercom, a reptilian voice that made my skin crawl. It started talking, and I immediately knew it wasn't human, and yet it sounded just like Max. I mean, he's been in my class for years. Isn't that weird? It was like someone had taken his voice and ran it through a synthesizer to deepen it and slow it down. I heard weird hissing breaths as he spoke. "Hello, friends," the voice whispered, but the words boomed through every classroom and hallway. "We have a very special day planned for you. The activities are already prepared, and the festivities will now begin. Don't try to escape now. That breaks the rules. The first of the sheep have already been slaughtered. Good luck." I figured some hoodlum had snuck into the office and somehow used the intercom while the secretary was out getting a cup of coffee or using the bathroom. I put my hand up as the class began to chatter, trying to calm them down. Kids, I said. "It's clearly just a prank. Please, calm down." Then the classroom door flew open and a girl came running inside. She was covered in blood from head to toe. She had deep slices across the back of her head, her forehead, her right cheek and right arm. Large fetid drops of blood fell behind her as she ran, as if leaving breadcrumbs to find her way back. The wounds on her body changed colours in front of her eyes, turning purple then black. Necrotic tissue began to spread and die within moments. Black blood streamed from the wounds. Her mouth opened in a silent scream, but only a choked gasping came out. Something had infested the girl. I could see it. I quickly backed away, feeling like it was a dream. "Please, oh God, please help," she whispered, whimpering, her legs buckling. She fell to her knees. The kids in the classroom began to scream. "Please, someone help me." Her voice grew louder, her skin paler as the purplish, dying patches of tissue spread. She opened her mouth and began to vomit some foul, oily sludge. It hurts, she moaned, falling into the puddle of vomit. Isn't someone going to help me? I ran to her side. I didn't know this girl. She wasn't in any of my classes, you see, but I knew she needed medical attention immediately. What happened? I asked. Who did this? She got close to my ear and whispered, "There's things in the hallways that shouldn't exist," she said, still whimpering. She coughed up more blood and black fluid, rolling onto her back afterwards and breathing hard. Her eyelids fluttered and her skin went pale. I thought she was losing consciousness, until her eyes rolled back in her head and she sat up, grinning. Claws began to rip out of her fingers, black tears streamed down her face, and that dark sludge dripped from her mouth like a diseased drops of saliva. Her body lengthened and her arms and legs broke and twisted. I could hear the bones snapping like tree branches during a winter storm. I watched the transformation in horror, backing away. The other kids were all screaming and streaming to the back of the classroom. The girl hissed as black veins appeared all around her face and neck. She rose and walked towards the scared kids in the back, her movements as smooth as a synchronized dancer's, jerky and twisted, nightmarish in their own way. But what came next was far worse. Her body grew taller, thinner, and more emaciated as it stretched up to the ceiling, towering over every other kid in the classroom. She must have grown to at least 7 feet by that point. Her arms reached out, the bone-white claws sharpening as she struck out at the screaming row of children in front. I saw drops of blood splash against the back wall, and a couple boys stumbled forwards, their throats slashed wide open. Their panic-stricken faces grew pale and bloodless as they choked and tried to scream, but only bubbling gasps came out. I saw the window was open, and I was on the first floor. I decided to run to try get help. I knew we needed policemen and medics at the scene, and I couldn't do anything to save the kids. Well, to be honest, I feel terrible about it, but I did run. As the screams followed me from the back of the classroom, I jumped right out the window and ran across the playground and scaled the fence. But as I went, I heard a strange, shrill laughter coming from the intercom. And you know what? I'm positive. The voice sounded just like Max. Max came home early from school that day, grinning and laughing. He was in a fine mood. I don't know what happened after the teacher left, or how many people died in that building of horrors. But I know that Max caused it all. The first prodding steps in the path of his ascension, the foundational layer to his throne of bones. Mr. Allen had talked to Jenna early that morning, immediately after running home from that den of nightmares, and she had already put a plan into motion. When Max got home from school, she gave him a Gatorade with a large amount of fentanyl she had purchased from a random drug dealer in the inner city, dissolved inside. She added some more sugar to mask any slight bitterness, and gave it to the grinning boy with large black pupils like smoldering coals. He drank it quickly, looking at it the whole time with his dilated eyes. He smiled and got up, but soon afterwards collapsed. Jenna found him unconscious in his bedroom and dragged him to the bathroom. She filled the tub and held Max underwater until the bubbles stopped. As my wife explained it all to me, a sense of loss and horror came over me. I didn't know if I missed Max or not. His swollen blue face showed, without a doubt, that he was dead. I took my wife outside and sat her down at the table, debating whether I should call the police. No one had ever told me what to do in this situation, and I felt like I was flying blind. I got up, pacing. I went to the oven and started brewing some instant coffee. Soft footsteps rustled behind me. I turned around to see Max, seemingly alive and well, but also changed in some fundamentally disturbing way. His eyes had now turned fully black. He hovered inches above the ground behind my wife, smiling at me. His teeth seemed much sharper and longer than before. A feeling of electricity sizzled in the air. I could see some sort of expansive black aura rippling around his pale skin, dark and cold as empty space. Goosebumps rose on my body just from being near that sickly aura. The water pot began to boil behind me. Behind Max, I saw the strange, mutated children from the school creep out from the front hallway. 4 or 5 of them skittered about with emaciated, twisted legs bending in ways no human leg should bend. Their heads nearly scraped the lower kitchen ceiling. Their pale, broken arms reached down to their knees, jointed in myriad areas. I could hear the soft cracking of bones now as they slowly moved forwards, a light snapping sound like small twigs broken underfoot. Their blank, white eyes constantly dribbled ebony tears that stained their bleached, bloodless skin. "Mother, mother," Max said condescendingly, sounding like a disappointed parent. "You should have known that you cannot kill me except by decapitation or by burning my body. Do you really think my true father would let a worthless louse like yourself kill me before my ascension to the throne? Are you that foolish and blind?" Jenna began to cry, refusing to look at her son. "But I respect your courage and action. For that, I will give you a quick death." He looked straight at me. "Which is something you'll not receive, fake father. You're a weak, worthless coward, and you deserve to die slowly, screaming yourself hoarse and pleading for release. For so do the screams of the weak sound as a beautiful symphony to the ears of my true father and myself. The deaths of the weak will pave the road to a new world." He motioned to the mutated children behind him. Their bodies had become so twisted and contorted that I couldn't tell whether they'd been boys or girls. They looked only like monsters now, like walking corpses. In a blur, one of them ran forward and grabbed my wife's head. A scream bubbled in my throat as I watched, but it was over before I even knew what was happening. The thing used its crooked, clawed fingers to twist her head, snapping her neck in a second. Jenna's face was now looking straight behind her, the skin on her neck spiraling around in sickly folds. On her broken flesh, I saw burst blood vessels and rapidly spreading purple bruises. She gave a death grasp, releasing an endless, choking breath, her eyelids fluttering and fingers twitching. Then, she was still. Max gave a slow, deep laugh, a grating sound that seemed to rise up from the depths of his withered soul. His black eyes flashed with amusement and pleasure. Max grinned, his vampiric teeth shining and white, reflecting the cold winter sunlight streaming in from the window. The water pot began to whistle as increasing torrents of steam poured out of it. Without hesitation, I spun and grabbed it, flicking open the spout by pressing the button on the handle. Then I flung it at Max, the boiling hot water flying out in a spiraling stream as the metal water pot circled through the air. It all seemed to happen as if in slow motion. I saw Max's look of triumph and amusement morph into a scowl of hatred and anger. But the motion had been so quick and accurate that he couldn't have moved in time. The heavy metal pot smacked him in the face, spilling scalding hot water all over his face and neck. He screamed and fell back, knocking over the mutated bodies of the children he had turned into his mindless followers. I sprinted towards the door, without looking back, heading outside. The constant stream of police and ambulance sirens heading to the school had stopped. Now, dozens of black SUVs streamed into town. Men in dark suits and mirrored sunglasses stepped out. I looked back to the house and saw a few of the new arrivals running in with automatic rifles. Others headed to the neighbors' houses, breaking down doors and entering without knocking. I heard rifles firing and hoarse, gurgled screams. The mutated children ran out of my house, their bodies riddled with bullets. They slowly lost energy as black blood streamed out of multiple giant exit wounds eaten into their bodies. They eventually fell down in the streets and died with a rasping breath. But they never found Max. They quarantined the town and went from house to house and building to building, searching for the source of all this death and evil. But he had somehow escaped. They killed all the mutated fanatics they could find, but the bodies of many children from the school seemed unaccounted for. I knew where they had gone. They had followed Max, fanatical soldiers for his new army, fearless of death and committed to the leader in his new world order. I don't know where Max went or where he'll show up next, but I know he's moving towards his ascension, and the next time I see him, he will arrive in power and glory and crush out the lives of millions of people under his feet. I got a job right out of college and had to find a new place at short notice. Using my socials, I got in contact with a landlord through a mutual contact. They had a spare apartment that was just made available. The previous tenant had been evicted a couple of weeks prior because of unpaid rent, so the apartment hadn't even been advertised yet. The apartment was nice enough, but all my attention was on my new job. I pretty much just brought a bed and a desktop computer, leaving 2 of my 3 rooms empty for the time being. I wasn't certain if I was going to stay there long term or not, but I figured time would decide. I ended up staying there several years. I settled into my job, furnished the place up, and made it into a proper home. Those first few stressful weeks became nothing but a distant memory. About 3 years after moving in, I had to stash some furniture. I contacted my landlord to see if there was some storage space I could use. He reminded me that there was storage on the bottom floor that I hadn't used. I didn't even know it was there. Not that surprising, seeing as I was really stressed out when I first moved in. Apparently, the space had been used by the previous tenant, who might have left some items there. I hadn't had any use for such a space before, so I hadn't thought about asking. So, imagine my surprise when I get to the storage, only to see a crash test dummy. Using a key I got from the landlord, I unlocked the padlock and got a closer look. It was a white, life-size crash test dummy with a hastily scribbled Mr. Mayhem written on the back of its head with a black Sharpie. The dummy was scuffed and worn, but still had a plastic smile on its face. Its eyes were these little painted black dots. It looked like it had been through hell and a half. I asked the landlord about it. Turns out the previous tenant had used it as a sort of mascot. They brought it out for fun, for parties, pranks, that kind of thing. I saw him use it to cheat a carpool lane once, my landlord shared. It was just this funny thing he'd gotten from his job when they upgraded to newer dummies. It was probably more than 40 years old. I cleaned out the storage and stashed away my furniture. I thought about what to do with Mr. Mayhem and figured it'd be a fun piece for my upcoming Halloween party. I could dress it up in something and keep it by the entrance. It'd be the talk of the town. Still, there was something unnerving about it. the way its joints creaked and cracked, that frozen, painted-on grin, the sloppy joints rattling haphazardly with every little movement. My yearly Halloween party is nothing extravagant. I get a couple of friends together and we dress up, then we hit one of the local clubs for a costume party. It's like a pre-party, only with about 18 people or so. I dressed up Mr. Mayhem in a cheap pirate costume and had his stand by the door with a tray of snacks. I went as the Penguin, but everyone mistook me for the Monopoly Man. People came around at around 7. Mr. Mayhem was a big hit. There's just something about dummies and dolls that rub people the wrong way. It's the uncanny valley thing of it, I guess. It was the centerpiece for a lot of selfies that night. As the punch bowl got emptier and the night got darker, we all left for the club, leaving Mr. Mayhem by the door. I had a lot of fun. A few drinks too many. There was a bit of drama with 2 friends of mine having an argument, but all in all, it was a good night. An acquaintance of mine won the costume contest with a sort of bioluminescent fish thing. It was insane. If you got a costume that you gotta charge batteries for, you've taken it to another level. In the moment, I couldn't tell anything was wrong, but if I'd listened a little closer, I would have heard a thing or two. Cracking and creaking heard from the alley out back as something moved. The bouncer mentioned a guy dressed as a crash test dummy. A dark silhouette just outside the frosted glass of the bathroom window. By the end of the night, I made my way home and slid the keys into my door, only to notice that it was already unlocked. I could have sworn I locked it, but figured I must have missed it in all the commotion. I did a drunken half check around the apartment to see that nothing was stolen. There wasn't. I didn't even think about checking for Mr. Mayhem. If I had, I would have noticed there was nothing standing by the door, waiting for me with snacks. I would have noticed the bowl having rolled off to the side, spilling wrapped toffees and butter caramels across the carpet. But no. My face planted into my bed and waited for another day. It wasn't until the next morning that I noticed it was missing. I sent a couple of texts to the others at the party, asking if they did something to it. All I got was a resounding no in response. If anything, they just thought it had been a fun prop. I checked all over the apartment and the storage. I even asked my next door neighbor if they'd seen anything. Nothing. Mr. Mayhem was just gone. It wasn't a big loss or anything, but I didn't like the idea of someone being in my apartment for no good reason. Things just don't disappear for nothing. If someone wanted a crash test dummy, I could have sold it for a quick 100 or so. Instead, I found myself running back and forth, growing increasingly anxious about someone being in my space. I even called the landlord about having the locks changed. The following Monday, Mr. Mayhem was still missing. While it was still on my mind, I had 100 more pressing matters at hand. It had started raining, and absent-mindedly wandered across the parking lot. I was almost at the front door, when something in the back of my mind asked me to stop, like a sudden feeling of unease. It's hard to explain, a challenge to look a little closer. So I did. Turning around and looking up, I could see Mr. Mayhem. He was on the roof of my apartment building with his head aligned straight forward. Someone must have dragged it up there as a joke. It looked like someone about to jump off a building. I was going to have to bring it down. I didn't want anyone to be accidentally traumatized. I headed straight for the door to the stairwell, covering my head with a file folder. The rain was relentless. Something smashed into the pavement right in front of me. A loud plastic bang as Mr. Mayhem hit the ground. A couple of feet further and I'd have been crushed. I just stood there for a moment, hearing the rain tapping against my file folder on my head. Mr. Mayhem was intact, but the body was just mangled. Every single extremity bent at an unnatural angle, but that didn't hamper that eerie painted-on smile. I was a bit hesitant to touch it. My heart was racing. That thing was heavy, and it had fallen far enough to do some serious damage had it hit me, which it almost did. I dragged it back down into the basement storage. I had to shuffle around some furniture and ended up tossing it on top of an old sofa. I locked the storage with a padlock, turned off the lights, and closed the door behind me. I'd get rid of that thing soon enough. I went to bed early that night. I kept getting shakes and twitches, as if my body was still recoiling from having Mr. Mayhem crash into the pavement right in front of me. I felt twitchy, as if I hadn't slowed down yet. I was stuck in high gear, and it carried over into the next morning. I stress cleaned my kitchen and bedroom before I even got breakfast. As I was cleaning in and around the fridge, I scooped out what looked like an old faded note, a post-it that must have been stuck to the fridge by the previous tenant. Don't let it out. I stood there, staring at the note for a good few minutes, letting my paranoia run rampant. I tried to explain it away, but every thought came circling back around to one point. There must have been a reason for Mr. Mayhem being left behind, and what happened to the previous tenant. Over the next few days, I considered how to get rid of it. I thought about just driving it to the garbage dump and dropping it off somewhere, but I didn't like the idea of it being let out. I could burn it, but I had to get a good space to do it. I could just sell it, of course. That didn't feel responsible either. I was running out of patience and ideas, so I finally decided on sawing it up and dropping it into the river. I prepped a backpack with a saw, duct tape, a hammer, and garbage bags. The following night, I got to work. I dragged Mr. Mayhem out to my car and stuffed it into the trunk. I didn't want to do it in the daylight, as the thing still looked like a person, and I didn't want to have to explain myself. I was going to drive down to a clear spot near the river and get to work. It wasn't far, but I had to cross the highway. It was a short drive, but it was tense. It felt like I was doing something wrong, like Mr. Mayhem was a person rather than a dummy. As I closed the trunk and got behind the wheel, I steeled myself. The moment I put the keys in, I got this strange impulse that I should have duct taped its hands and feet. Then again, why should I? It was just a dummy. I got stuck waiting at two separate left turns. Each time I just sat there listening to the hum of the engine, expecting to hear a thumping or smacking, something coming from the trunk. I was expecting the thing to do something. It was an irrational thing to listen for, but I couldn't help it. And yet, nothing came. I crossed the highway, made my way down the river, and found a spot by a clearing where I wouldn't bother anyone. I parked my car, got out, and held my breath as I opened the trunk. For a split second, I could imagine someone lying there, a living person screaming, pleading for help. I blinked it away as the trunk revealed Mr. Mayhem in all his inanimate splendor. There was nothing here to fear. Still, just chopping up something with the shape of a person was going to be uncomfortable. I dragged it out to the bank of the river, laid out my tools, and took a good look at it. I reached for the hammer first to break the joints. That would make it easier to saw. The thing was made to withstand serious punishment. Breaking it wouldn't be easy. I started with the left hand as a sort of test run. I whacked out the joints and brought out the saw. But I got this sick feeling in my stomach with every crack. I never heard bone breaking, but I imagined that was it. I felt like a butcher. And those eyes, those plain-looking, painted-on eyes, just little dots, but I felt them boring into my mind. A cheap human imitation, but human nonetheless. I skipped ahead a few steps and aimed the hammer directly at its face. I brought the hammer down, smack after smack after smack, until the dummy cracked. The nose buckled inwards and the cheeks split into butterfly-shaped shards. I picked out pieces with my nails. I shuddered. There was some sort of padding on the inside that just made my skin crawl. There was something about the texture. I paused. There was a small, white growth. A tooth. I stepped back, looking down at the broken dummy. Just beneath the cracked surface, embedded inside, was a dead man, mummified and dried within the confines of the plastic shell. I couldn't breathe. It had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. There were so many things to do that I couldn't begin to form a coherent thought. Who do I call? What do I do? Could I possibly be liable for some kind of damage? Who was the person inside? Were they missing? I stepped back, dropping the hammer. I covered my mouth and took these little micro breaths, repeating, "Oh my God," to myself over and over, as if the rocking motion would somehow dislodge a good idea from the back of my mind. I decided I'd get back to my car and call the police. I hurried back, got into the driver's seat and closed the door. I took out my cell phone, dialed the emergency services, and then heard a click. I looked to the left. Something fast moved my way, and then the world turned upside down in a sudden shock of pain. I drifted in and out of consciousness. I was somewhere dark and cramped. It must have taken me at least 10 minutes just to realize I was in the trunk of my car, and the car was moving. I could hear the radio, albeit turned down. I had a swelling over my nose and my left eye, and I could feel my sense of balance being shaky at best. I reached for my cell phone, but it was still in the passenger seat. I never managed to call the emergency services. At some point, the car came to a stop. I heard the door on the driver's side open and close, then the sound of someone walking away. There was a slight echo to it, suggesting we were parked somewhere inside, possibly a large space. I didn't waste any time. Instead of trying to open the trunk, I wriggled and crawled my way into the back seat. From there, I contorted myself into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and fumbled around for my cell phone. Looking up intermittently, I could see that I was in some kind of storage facility. It was hard to tell. The lights were off. As soon as I felt the cold metal of the phone, I picked it up, unlocked it, and dialed the emergency services. It didn't take long for a voice to come in on the other end. I've been kidnapped," I stuttered. "I don't know where I am, but—" If I hadn't talked so loud, I might have heard the footsteps coming back. If I'd been more attentive, I could have seen it in the rear-view mirror. But I was both loud and inattentive, and it came at a great cost. Because, as the operator asked me about my name and location, the driver's side window was shattered into 1,000 pieces. Something grabbed me by the neck and shoulder. A second later, I was flung through the window and out onto the cold pavement, about 8 feet or so. The cell phone tumbled to the ground as a white plastic foot crushed it. Looking up, I saw it in full view. Mr. Mayhem, now revealing a death's head grin. I ran. I got to my feet and just took off. I could hear thumping plastic noises behind me as Mr. Mayhem followed. I ran straight through an abandoned workshop and a lunchroom. Finally, I slammed the door open to an unmarked space, hoping against hope it would be something useful. A small room, packed to the brim with crash test dummies. At least 50, standing shoulder to shoulder. All those painted smiles and dot-like eyes, all looking my way. I didn't have time to see if they were like Mr. Mayhem or not, so instead of turning back, which would be a certain end, I pressed forward. I pushed my way past plastic arms, hands and torsos. Most were just empty shells, ready to be filled and used. Others were fully functional. I could have sworn a couple of heads turned my way, but I didn't stop to check. I could hear the footsteps that followed me slow, and as I turned around, I realized I had no idea where it had went. Just a sea of white, featureless creatures, and one of them was something else. I was afraid to move. I could be brushing up against that thing without even knowing. It was a sharp noise, as what sounded like broken glass being shuffled around on the floor. One clear sound of a shard being lifted. I tried to make my way to the back of the room so I could circle back. Every now and then, I'd look at the dummies, only to notice more of them with scribbles on the back of their head. Miss Waters, Mr. Calhoun, all made with hasty scribbles. A stray thought crossed my mind. Maybe it wasn't Mr. Mayhem, but Mr. Mayhew. It had been kind of hard to tell. I had yet to run into it. As I began circling the dark corners of the room, making my way back the way I came, I heard the sound of glass scraping against plastic as something was coming closer. I had to keep myself from panicking. There was no telling what would happen if I were to stumble in there. Instead, I kept a steady pace, trying to count my breaths. 1, 2, brushing up against another dummy. I stopped. Something was strange. It didn't have a left hand. It slowly turned my way, revealing a dead man's face. Mr. Mayhem. An impromptu glass shank sliced at me, scraping the edge of my jacket and shattering against the wall. A handless left arm reached for me, but I pushed it aside. I bowled over the lifeless dummies and headed straight for the door. Reaching it and leaving the dummies behind me, I slammed the door shut. I hastily looked to see if there was a lock, but there wasn't. Before I could make a plan, the door came off its hinges and tumbled to the ground like a cracked bowling pin. Mr. Mayhem twitched forward, every movement sudden and painful. Making my way back to the workshop, I realized that there was no way I could outrun it. Mr. Mayhem was both faster and more resilient. I was grasping at straws. There had to be something, anything. I dodged a chain coming down from the ceiling and kept going towards the back, only to stop. That chain, I could use it. It was connected to a winch in the middle of the factory floor, probably used to hoist and move equipment. It would have to do. The timing had to be perfect. If I went too soon or too late, I'd be done for. I saw Mr. Mayhem approaching, step by step, unblinking painted eyes replaced with hollow sockets. Then, I pulled at the winch as hard as I could, hoping against hope. The effect was immediate. I hadn't seen the hook at the end. It shot straight up, impaling Mr. Mayhem's lower jaw. The chain was still slack, and it was getting closer, but it couldn't quite get to me anymore. Instead, I kept pulling and pulling and pulling, every rattle in the chain bringing it higher and higher into the air, like hoisting a flag. As the chain clicked into a lock, Mr. Mayhem was dangling 15 feet or so in the air. It stopped moving. Even though it couldn't move its face, I could feel it looking at me, plotting. This wasn't going to be the end of it. I made my way back to the car, calling the emergency services as I wiped the broken glass from the driver's seat. As I was asked for a location, I noticed something on the far walls. A series of overalls hanging at the edge of the door. 3 to be exact. One for Patty Waters and another for John Calhoun. And the final one for Samson Mayhew. Eventually, the police came. I'd gone outside and collapsed against the wall, crushing a handful of overgrown wildflowers on my way down. I just sat there, picking the petals of a blue sunflower, when the officers came around to ask me questions. I tried to explain that I'd been kidnapped and assaulted, but there was no way for me to tell them that the crash test dummy had done it. Instead, I had to lie through my teeth. I had to say that my mystery attacker had hoisted that dummy up into the air. It didn't take long for the police to find not one, but 3 bodies. 3 workers at the abandoned factory, all presumed dead and missing, stuffed within the framing of the crash test dummies they themselves had made decades ago. This was about 2 years ago, somewhere in that ballpark. I haven't seen or heard anything about those dummies since. I think they cleared out the storage, and I think they had some kind of forensic specialist on site. But there was no public announcement or accusation. I was only called in once to make a basic statement, but there was no follow-up. I've been imagining those 3 dummies sitting locked up in some storage, just biding their time. That dead face waiting to look my way again. Now, the reason why I write this is because of something I read the other month. There was an article about a break-in at the county evidence locker, resulting in 1 wounded officer and a handful of pieces of evidence going missing. The assailants were described as 2 men and a woman. They were described as bald and wearing plain white clothes. If I was a betting man, I'd say there isn't much time before we start seeing more than 3 of these Misters and Misses. If I hadn't gotten out of there, I'm pretty sure there was an empty casing that would, in time, have my name on it. And maybe there still is. The gentle sway of the train car had always been soothing to me. As a regional sales manager for a large pharmaceutical company, I spent more time on railways than I did in my own bed. The rhythmic clack of the wheels on the tracks was my lullaby. The ever-changing landscape outside my window a constant companion. This particular Tuesday evening found me on yet another overnight train, heading from Chicago to New York for a critical meeting. I settled into my usual routine. Laptop out, spreadsheets open, a cup of mediocre coffee cooling on the fold-down tray. The first sign that something was amiss came about 3 hours into a journey. I glanced at my watch, frowning slightly. We should have reached Cleveland by now, but the cityscape outside remained stubbornly rural. Fields and forests rolled by, bathed in the eerie glow of a full moon. I flagged down a passing attendant, a middle-aged woman with greying hair and a pinched expression. "Excuse me," I said, "but shouldn't we have reached Cleveland by now?" She gave me a strange look, her eyes slightly unfocused. "Cleveland? I'm sorry, sir, but I'm not familiar with that stop. Perhaps you're thinking of a different route?" Before I could respond, she hurried away, disappearing into the next car. I sat back, puzzled. How could she not know Cleveland? It was a major stop on this line. I shook my head, chalking it up to a new employee's confusion, and returned to my work. As the hours ticked by, my unease grew. The landscape outside never changed. An endless loop of moonlit fields and shadowy forests. My phone had lost signal long ago, and my watch seemed to be malfunctioning, its hands spinning wildly before stopping altogether. I decided to stretch my legs, hoping a walk through the train might clear my head. As I made my way through the cars, I noticed how eerily quiet it was. The few passengers I saw sat motionless in their seats, staring blankly ahead or out the windows. In the dining car, I found an elderly man hunched over a cup of coffee. His wrinkled hands trembled slightly as he lifted the mug to his lips. "Excuse me," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "I don't mean to bother you, but have you noticed anything strange about this journey?" The old man's rheumy eyes focused on me, a flicker of recognition passing across his face. "You're new, aren't you?" he said, his voice a dry whisper. "First time on this line?" I nodded, a chill running down my spine. "What do you mean, this line? This is just a regular Chicago to New York route, isn't it?" He let out a wheezing laugh that turned into a cough. "Oh, my boy," he said, shaking his head. "This ain't no regular route. This here's the last line. Ain't no New York where we're headed." "I don't understand," I said, my heart beginning to race. "Where are we going then?" The old man leaned in close, the smell of stale coffee on his breath. "Nowhere," he whispered. "Everywhere. This train don't stop, son. It just keeps going, round and round, world without end." I jerked back, convinced I was dealing with a madman. "That's impossible," I said. "Every train has to stop eventually." He just smiled a sad, knowing expression. "You go on believing that if it makes you feel better. But mark my words, you'll see. We'll figure it out sooner or later." I stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over my chair. "You're crazy," I muttered, backing away. "This is just a normal train. We'll be in New York by morning." As I turned to leave, the old man called out, "What's your name, son?" I hesitated for a moment before answering, Jack Thurston." He nodded slowly. "Well, Jack Thurston, I'm Howard. I'll be seeing you around. We've got all the time in the world, after all." I hurried back to my seat, Howard's words echoing in my mind. It was nonsense, of course. Trains didn't just go on forever. There had to be a rational explanation for the delays and strange behavior of the staff. As I sank into my seat, I noticed a young woman across the aisle, furiously scribbling in a notebook. Her long dark hair fell in a curtain around her face, and her leg bounced with nervous energy. "Excuse me," I said, leaning towards her. "I don't suppose you know when we're due to arrive in New York, do you?" She looked up, her eyes wide and slightly manic. "New York?" she repeated, letting out a hysterical giggle. "Oh, honey, there is no New York, not anymore. There's only the train." I felt my blood run cold. "What are you talking about?" She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been on this train for I don't know how long. Days, weeks. It all blurs together. But I figured it out. We're not going anywhere. We're stuck in a loop, a never-ending journey to nowhere." I shook my head, refusing to believe it. "That's impossible. You're just confused. Maybe you fell asleep and missed your stop." She laughed again, a sound devoid of humor. "Oh, I wish it were that simple. Look around you. Have you seen anyone get off? Have we stopped at any stations? This isn't a normal train, Jack. This is something else entirely." I started at the sound of my name. "How did you know my name?" She smiled a sad, knowing expression. "I heard you talking to old Howard in the dining car. I'm Lisa, by the way. Welcome aboard the Eternal Express." I stood up abruptly, my head spinning. "This is insane. All of you are insane. I'm going to find the conductor and get some answers." As I stormed off towards the front of the train, I heard Lisa call out behind me, "Good luck with that, but don't say I didn't warn you." I made my way through car after car, each one identical to the last. The same faded blue seats, the same flickering overhead lights, the same blank-faced passengers staring into nothingness. How long had I been walking? It felt like hours, but that was impossible in a train of normal length. Finally, I reached what should have been the engine car. But instead of a locomotive, I found myself in another passenger car, exactly like all the others. I spun around, disoriented. How could this be? A hand on my shoulder made me jump. I turned to find the attendant from earlier, her pinched face now twisted into an unnaturally wild smile. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice sickly sweet. "I need to speak to the conductor," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "There's been some kind of mistake. This train should have reached New York by now." Her smile never wavered. "I'm sorry, sir, but there is no conductor, and there is no mistake. You're exactly where you're supposed to be." I backed away from her, my heart pounding. "What is this place? What's happening?" She tilted her head, her eyes suddenly black and empty. "This is the last line, Mr. Thurston. The train that never stops, never ends. You bought a ticket, and now you're on the ride of eternity." I turned and ran, pushing past confused passengers, my breath coming in ragged gasps. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a dream, a hallucination, anything but reality. I burst into the space between cars, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. The door next to the car was just a few feet away. If I could just reach it, maybe I could find a way off this nightmare train. But as I stepped forward, the gap between the cars seemed to stretch. The next door moved further and further away, no matter how fast I ran. The wind howled around me, drowning out my screams of frustration and fear. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my arm, yanking me back into the car. I fell to the floor, gasping for breath. Lisa stood over me, her face pale in the flickering light. "Are you crazy?" she hissed. "You can't come out there. Between the cars, that's where it gets you." "Where what gets you?" I asked, my voice shaking. She helped me to my feet, glancing nervously at the door. "The thing that runs this train, the thing that brought us all here. Trust me, you don't want to meet it." As if on cue, a low, rumbling sound echoed through the car. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before. Part machine, part animal, all wrong. The lights flickered more intensely, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw something massive moving in the shadows between the cars. Lisa pulled me back to our seats, her grip on my arm almost painful. "Listen to me," she said urgently. "I know this is hard to accept. God knows I fought against it for I don't even know how long, but fighting only makes it worse. You have to accept where you are, or you'll go mad." I slumped in my seat, my mind reeling. But why? Why is this happening? What is this place? She shook her head. "I don't know. None of us do. All we know is that we're here on this never-ending journey. Some think it's hell, others purgatory. Old Howard thinks it's some kind of cosmic mistake. Me? I think it's just the universe's way of saying, 'Tough luck, kiddo.'" I looked out the window, watching the same moonlit landscape roll by. How many times had I seen those same fields, those same trees? How long would I continue to see them? "So, what do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Lisa gave me a sad smile. "We ride, we talk, we try to stay sane, and we hope that maybe, just maybe, one day we'll reach the last stop." As the train rolled into the endless night, I realized with a sinking heart that my journey had only just begun. And the destination? That remained a terrifying mystery. Days blended into nights, and nights into days. The monotonous rhythm of the train became the backdrop to my existence. I lost count of how many times I'd watched the same scenery roll by, how many times I walked the length of the train hoping to find something, anything different. Lisa became my anchor in this sea of madness. We spent hours talking, sharing stories of our lives before the train. She'd been a journalist, always chasing the next big story. "Guess I found it," she would say with a bitter laugh, gesturing at our surroundings. Old Howard joined us often, his weathered face a map of the time he'd spent on this hellish journey. "Been riding this rail for longer than I can remember," he'd say, his rheumy eyes distant. "Seen folks come and go. Some just disappear. Others..." He trailed off, shaking his head. I learned to fear the spaces between the cars. Sometimes, late at night, when the train's rhythm seemed to falter, we'd hear things. Scraping, slithering sounds. Once, I caught a glimpse of something massive and dark undulating past the windows. Lisa pulled me away before I could get a better look. "Trust me," she said, her face pale. "You don't want to know." The other passengers were a mix of the resigned and the mad. Some, like us, tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Others had given in to despair, sitting in the same spots day after day, staring blankly at nothing. And then there were those who'd lost their minds entirely, prowling the cars with wild eyes and incoherent ramblings. One such soul was a man we called the Preacher. Tall and menacing, with a tangled beard and eyes that burned with fanatical fervor, he would roam the train shouting about sin and redemption. "We're all here for a reason," he'd bellow, spittle flying from his lips. "This is our punishment, our penance. Repent and maybe, just maybe, you'll find your way off this damn train." Most ignored him, but some listened. I watched as he gathered a small following, passengers desperate for any explanation, any hope of escape. It was on what I guessed to be my 100th day on the train that things took a darker turn. I was jolted awake by screams coming from the front of the car. Lisa was already on her feet, her face a mask of terror. "They've done it," she whispered. "They've actually done it." I followed her gaze to see a group of the Preacher's followers dragging a struggling passenger towards the door between cars. The Preacher stood by, his arms raised, chanting something I couldn't make out over the victim's screams. "What are they doing?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "A sacrifice," old Howard said, his voice grim. "Fools think they can appease whatever's running this train, buy their way off with blood." I started to move towards them, but Lisa held me back. "Don't," she hissed. "There's nothing we can do, just don't watch." But I couldn't look away. The group reached the door, and with a final, triumphant cry from the Preacher, they shoved their victim out into the space between cars. For a moment, nothing happened. Then came a sound. A wet, tearing noise that would haunt my nightmares for days to come. The door slammed shut, cutting off the screams. The Preacher turned to face the rest of us, his eyes wild with excitement. "It is done," he shouted. "The unworthy has been cast out. Soon we shall reach our final destination." But the train rolled on, unchanged. Hours passed, then days. No final stop, no salvation, just the endless journey and the growing madness of the Preacher and his flock. More sacrifices followed. The train's population dwindled as passenger after passenger was thrown to whatever lurked between the cars. Those of us who refused to join the Preacher's cult banded together, watching each other's backs, sleeping in shifts. It was during one of my watch shifts that I first saw her. A little girl, no more than 7 or 8, wandering alone through the car. Her pink dress was pristine, her blonde hair neatly braided. She looked so out of place in this nightmare that for a moment I thought I was hallucinating. "Hello?" I said softly, not wanting to scare her. "Are you lost?" She turned to me, and I had to stifle a gasp. Her eyes were completely black, like empty voids in a small face. When she spoke, her voice was old, ancient even. "Lost?" she repeated, tilting her head. "No, I don't think so. I know exactly where I am. Do you?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "What are you?" I whispered. She smiled, revealing teeth that were just a bit too sharp. "I'm a passenger, just like you. We're all passengers here, Jack. All of us, riding the rails to eternity." "How do you know my name?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "I know everyone's name," she said, her black eyes boring into mine. "I know why they're here. I know their sins, their fears, their deepest, darkest secrets." She took a step closer. "Would you like to know yours, Jack?" I backed away, my heart pounding. "Stay away from me," I said, my voice shaking. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, Jack, you can't run from any of this. You bought your ticket. Now, you have to ride." I blinked, and she was gone. Just vanished, as if she'd never been there at all. I slumped in my seat, my mind reeling. Was I losing it? Had I finally snapped, like so many others on this godforsaken train? I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, Lisa was shaking me awake. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Jack," she said urgently, "something's happening. The train, it's slowing down." I sat up, suddenly alert. She was right. For the first time since this nightmare began, I could feel the train decelerating. The familiar clack of wheels on tracks was slowing, becoming more distinct. Passengers were stirring, looking around in confusion and hope. Even the preacher and his followers had stopped their mad ranting, staring out the windows with a mix of fear and anticipation. "Are we stopping?" I asked, hardly daring to believe it. Old Howard shook his head, his expression grim. "Don't get your hopes up, son. In all my time here, I've never known this train to stop. Whatever's happening, it ain't gonna be good." As if to punctuate his words, the lights in the car began to flicker more intensely than ever before. The temperature dropped rapidly, my breath fogging in the suddenly frigid air. And then, with a great screeching of metal on metal, the train ground to a halt. For a moment, there was absolute silence. We all held our breath, waiting, hoping, fearing. Then, with a hiss of hydraulics, the door slid open. "Finally!" the preacher cried, pushing his way towards the exit. "Our salvation is at hand. Come, brothers and sisters, let us—" His words were cut off by a scream of pure terror. As he stepped off the train, something grabbed him. Something huge and dark and impossible. In the blink of an eye, he was gone, leaving nothing behind but a spreading pool of blood on the platform. Chaos erupted. Passengers pushed and shoved, some trying to get off the train, others desperately attempting to close the doors. I lost sight of Lisa in the pandemonium, and through it all, I heard laughter, the same glass-like sound from before. I turned to see the little girl with the black eyes standing calmly in the middle of the mayhem. "Welcome to the last stop, Jack," she said, her voice cutting through the screams and cries. "Are you ready to get off?" As I stared into those bottomless black eyes, I realized with dawning horror that our endless journey had only been the beginning. The real nightmare was just starting. And somewhere in the distance, I heard the sound of a train whistle signaling the departure to our next, unknown destination. The chaos around me faded into a dull roar as I stared into the little girl's black eyes. Time seemed to slow, and in that moment, I had a sudden, crystal clear realization. This was a test. The endless train ride, the maddening repetition, the horrors we'd witnessed, it had all been leading to this moment of choice. "No," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'm not getting off. Not here, not like this." The girl's smile faltered for a split second, a crack in her otherworldly composure. "You don't have a choice, Jack. Everyone has to get off eventually." I stood my ground, even as I heard more screams from the platform, more passengers being dragged into the darkness. "There's always a choice. You told me I bought a ticket for this ride. Well, I'm not ready for it to end." Her eyes narrowed. "You can't stay on the train forever, Jack. It doesn't work like that." "Watch me," I growled, turning away from her and pushing through the panicked crowd. I had to find Lisa and Howard. We'd survived this long together. I wasn't about to leave them behind now. I spotted Howard first, huddled in a corner, his eyes wide with terror. "Come on," I said, grabbing his arm. "We need to move." "Where?" he asked, his voice trembling. "There's nowhere to go. It's got us. It's finally got us." I shook him, perhaps more roughly than I intended. "Listen to me. This isn't the end. It's just another part of the journey. We have to stick together. Now, help me find Lisa." Something in my voice must have reached him, because he nodded, stumbling to his feet. He pushed through the crowd, searching desperately for Lisa's familiar face. We found her near the front of the car, trying to pull other passengers back from the door. "Lisa," I called out, "we have to go." She turned, relief flooding her face when she saw us. "Go where?" she asked as she reached us. "In case you haven't noticed, we're a little short on options here." I pointed toward the back of the train. "We keep going. This thing has to end somewhere, and I don't think it's here." As if in response to my words, I heard the train whistle again, louder this time. The engine was starting up. "It's leaving," Howard said, his eyes wide. "We have to get off now or we'll be trapped forever," I finished for him. "I've got news for you, Howard. We're already trapped. Have been since we first stepped on board. But now we have a chance to find the real way out." Lisa looked at me, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You think this is all part of it, don't you? The final test?" I nodded. "It has to be, and I'm not failing it by giving in now." The train lurched, beginning to move. The last of the passengers were either fleeing onto the platform or collapsing in despair. "It's now or never," I said. "Are you with me?" Lisa grabbed my hand without hesitation. Howard hesitated for a moment, looking longingly at the door, but then took Lisa's other hand. "All right," he said. "Let's see where this crazy train takes us." As the train picked up speed, we made our way towards the back, pushing against the tide of terrified passengers. The little girl appeared again, her face contorted with rage. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "You have to get off. Everyone gets off." "Not today," I told her, pushing past. We reached the final car, just as the platform disappeared from view. Through the windows, we could see only darkness, not the familiar darkness of night, but an absolute void, empty of all light and substance. The train picked up speed, rattling and shaking more violently than ever before. We huddled together, bracing ourselves against the walls of the car. "What now?" Lisa yelled over the noise. "We wait," I said, "and we don't let go." The darkness outside seemed to press in on us, seeping through the windows like a living thing. The lights in the car flickered and died, plunging us into blackness. I could feel Lisa's hand in mine, Howard's presence at my side, but I couldn't see them. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the shaking stopped. The oppressive darkness lifted, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the train began to slow. Sunlight, real, warm, beautiful sunlight, streamed through the windows. I blinked, my eyes not used to the brightness after so long in the train's artificial light. As my vision cleared, I saw that we were pulling into a station, a real station, with people waiting on the platform, going about their daily lives as if nothing was amiss. The train came to a gentle stop, and the doors opened with a familiar hiss. For a long moment, none of us moved, afraid that this was just another trick, another test. Then, Howard let out a whoop of joy and rushed for the door. Lisa and I followed, stepping out onto the platform on shaky legs. The station sign read, Grand Central Terminal. We were in New York. We had made it. As we stood there, breathless and disbelieving, I felt a tug on my sleeve. I turned to see the little girl with the black eyes, but now, in the sunlight, she looked different, normal, just a regular kid with brown eyes and a confused expression. "Excuse me," she said, her voice high and childish. "Is this the train to Chicago?" I knelt down to a level, smiling gently. "No, sweetheart, this train just came from Chicago. But trust me, you don't want to get on it." She nodded, thanked me, and ran off to find her parents. I watched her go, a weight lifting from my chest. Lisa squeezed my hand. "Is it really over?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I looked at her, then at Howard, then at the bustling station around us. "Yeah," I said, finally allowing myself to believe it. "I think it is." As we made our way out of the station and into the bright New York morning, I knew the memories of our endless journey would stay with us forever. But we had faced the darkness, made our choice, and found our way back to the light. And if I ever saw a train again, it would be too soon. When tragedy strikes, it unfolds in the most unexpected ways. There were no ominous narrations or suspenseful melodies, no hints that the ordinary will suddenly transform into an extraordinary event. In an instant, a cataclysm can reveal its devastating maw, leaving chaos and despair for those left to witness. The air was chilly in November, and amidst the anticipation of a 4-day Thanksgiving weekend, the impending doom of the finals loomed, clouding our excitement. That morning, I was in science class, doing my best on the final exam. Too quickly, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. The events that followed were both awe-inspiring and terror-inducing. As I recall, we were finalizing the evidence for our report when my ears popped as if I had rolled down the window of a speeding car. A jarring rumble shook the classroom, accompanied by a deafening blast that robbed me of breath. The fire alarm wailed as water rained down, drenching us. I sprang up from my desk with an odd adrenal focus. We hastily made our way toward the aisle, abandoning our finals. Surprisingly, we maintained a semblance of order. The fire alarm blared as our teacher guided us out, and we obeyed in a mix of fear and trust. Like frightened animals, we followed the teacher's lead, navigating the corridors to the nearest exit. We had to walk past my mum's classroom, and I wondered if I'd see her getting her kids out. As I turned the corner, her classroom came into full view, and what I beheld was a nightmare made manifest. My heart seemed to stop, yet its frantic pounding was louder than ever. My mother's classroom door, torn off its hinges, lay in a shattered heap against the opposite wall. The threshold was consumed by a furious inferno, raging uncontrollably. I was now the one to stand witness to this wake. I don't know what compelled me to charge into that blazing maw. Was it delusion of invincibility? A desperate belief that I could save her like a superhero? Or was it a simple act of need, driven by an unexplainable force? I cannot say, even now. I pushed through the flames and smoke, and as soon as I crossed the threshold, the fire ceased its anger. Descending the staircase with the grace of a stumbling infant, I hardly registered the loss of footing halfway down. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, dulling the pain as I tumbled, and I regained my balance on the final steps. And there, at the bottom step, an impossible coldness enveloped me. The chill of the air permeated my senses as I departed the bottom step. Inside the room, obscured by dense smoke, the cries of anguish echoed. A nervous sweat broke out on my brow as I ventured forward, guided by the sound. The acrid stench of burning and flesh and hair assaulted my senses, threatening to overpower me. Gradually, my eyes adjusted to the darkness, granting me the unwelcome gift of sight. I wish they had failed me. The horrifying images etched deeply into my psyche. Charred bodies strewn across the floor, their limbs twisted and contorted. Some still smouldered, becoming consumed by thin lines of crimson that crawled greedily along their blackening skin, reducing it to ash. The scene was catastrophic. It was repulsive. A nauseating sensation crept up from within, the familiar prelude to vomiting. I fought to suppress it, driven by an instinct to reach the crying emanating from an overturned desk in the far corner of the room. That must be my mum. She's still alive, I thought naively. My path was obstructed by the lifeless forms of classmates. Deep down, my gut warned me to leave, but I ignored it. Almost reaching the desk, my attention was drawn to yet another body lying in my path. This one was slightly larger than the others. It took only a moment to realize the unthinkable. This was my mother. Her right side was gruesomely absent, her eyes clouded with milky white, and her jaw hung slack. She had lost an arm and a leg. Dead. My mother lay lifeless at my feet. The sound of sobbing erupted again, originating from behind the desk. No discernible words, just heartbroken sobs. Setting aside my grief for the moment, aided by shock, I left my mother's side to reach this person. The true magnitude of the disaster had not yet fully sunk in, the realization that no one could have survived. The crying grew louder as I approached, echoing not only in my ears, but in my thoughts. It drowned out the clamour of the alarms. It was as if I was ensnared in a waking dream where the cries became my sole focus, blotting out every other sense. Reaching the desk, I cautiously peered behind it, my eyes drawn to a huddled figure in the corner. His blackened skin mirrored the others, and he possessed little remaining hair. Tremors coursed through his body as he faced the wall, his arms extended limply, wrists hanging from his forearms. "Hey!" I yelled. "Are you okay? Can you move?" I said as I maneuvered around the desk. Looking back on it now, it was incredibly obvious that he wasn't. No response. Perhaps the explosion had damaged his hearing. Instinctively, I reached out and grasped his hand. The moment our skin made contact, the crying ceased and the tremors subsided. Slowly, he began to turn his head towards me, his neck moving with jerky, disjointed snaps. And then, I beheld his face. Leathery skin clung to his emaciated skull, while his eyes wide, milky grey and white, mirrored my mother's. Through a slackened jaw, brown teeth peeked out, devoid of lips. His broken nose sat withered upon his face. Completely nude, his leathery skin continued down his skeletal frame, with patches peeling off, revealing a putrid yellow fluid oozing from the infected wounds. I stood there in shock, taking in his convulsions and heaves. Suddenly, his head rocked like that of a newborn, and he took a ragged, strained breath. Then, he let out a sound unlike anything I had ever heard. But that's not the right way to describe it. The sound triggered a sensation within me, a feeling that wasn't entirely my own. I was engulfed by an overwhelming grief, an intense pain that consumed me entirely. Guilt, as I'd never known, washed over me, threatening to drown me in its depths. I recoiled from the desk, stumbling backward until I fell into my mother's charred remains. A cloud of ash billowed forth, caressing my face as I gasped for air. I inadvertently inhaled the plumes of my mother's ash. I threw up on myself, tears streaming uncontrollably. Crawling on my hands and knees, I distanced myself from the nightmare, my existence teetering on the brink. I crawled and then ran once I regained my footing. I ran out of that room, up the stairs, through the engulfing flames, through the school, past my bewildered classmates. I kept running. I ran until my legs could no longer bear the weight of my body and my shattering reality. I just kept running. Eventually, I collapsed in a local park, where the police discovered me. The cold, crisp grass cradled my face, leaving damp imprints in unison with my tears. The officer who found me sat silently beside me in the field, offering no words of advice nor encouragement. We both began to shiver as the cold crept into our bones. I laid in that field until I succumbed to exhaustion and fell into a fitful sleep. I was so utterly exhausted. When the officer drove me home, I awoke to a reality that felt both distant and surreal. The following year slipped away in a haze, an amalgamation of twisting memories and blurred moments. I found myself residing in my mother's home, under the temporary custody of my aunt and uncle. The settlement from the life insurance payout, locked away in a conservatorship, offered a glimmer of financial security. Grateful for their decision, I thanked my lucky stars that my aunt did not seize the opportunity to claim the money as her own. Instead, she handed me a substantial sum of cash. It was an overwhelming amount for a 17-year-old to possess while grappling with the weight of newfound responsibility. In due course, I was granted emancipation, propelled forward by financial freedom. Little did I know that this freedom would become a catalyst for a destructive spiral, deepening the void within my soul with every regretful choice. The passing months merged, as if time itself was nothing more than a fleeting illusion. I was constantly oscillating between moments of heroin-induced intoxication and near unconsciousness. My days were spent in a perpetual state of chasing a fragile equilibrium, and so, as predictable and anticlimactic as it may sound, I succumbed to the overwhelming grip of a heroin overdose. I vaguely recall the nature documentary playing in the background as I craved another hit. Preparing the syringe, I found a suitable vein, and the liquid bliss coursed through my veins, flooding my senses. Was it my 5th hit? 6th? More than I'd ever done before. The rush surged through my body with an intensity I couldn't bear. My balance faltered, and I collapsed onto the couch, my head spinning in a disorienting haze. I slipped into unconsciousness, unaware of the vomit that spilled forth from my mouth. At that moment, I believed I was on the brink of death. In my haziness, I faintly recall the piercing scream of someone who had entered the front door. I must have appeared as the visual embodiment of the death I had longed for. It was my aunt who discovered me in that state, a sight she never deserved to see. She was far too good to be exposed to the wretchedness that had become me. Rehabilitation became an inevitable path I had to tread. My therapist posited that the horrors I witnessed in my mother's classroom were projections of my mind, personifications of the hellish experiences I endured. In the ensuing months, I grappled with a profound sense of worthlessness, despite the earnest efforts of those around me. Weeks continued to bleed into months, and progress toward emotional and mental recovery became a slow, agonizing burn. No matter the tools and coping mechanisms I acquired, no matter the mental acrobatics I performed, I found myself sinking deeper into the abyss. The insidious cravings for substances clung to my heart with sickening tenacity. By the end of that year, I retreated into seclusion, abandoning my education and embracing a life of isolation. Depression became my constant companion, blurring the days into an indistinguishable haze. I traded one vice for countless others, escaping reality through endless hours of content and video games, despising every fibre of my existence late into the solitary nights. Even in sleep, I found no respite. My nights were tormented by relentless nightmares, unyielding in their pursuit of stealing away what little rest I had left. At my emotional nadir, I ceased to care for even the most basic needs. My body, an instrument of survival, was now perpetually hunched, bent by the weight of my deteriorating state. I had become a repugnant wreck, a physical manifestation of the turmoil within my mind. I was a mirror reflecting the distorted image of my shattered mentality. The battle against my demons was slipping through my fingers, and I was losing myself in the process. In time, my life embarked on a transformative journey, emerging from the shattered remnants of an existence that had unwittingly become my solace. It began with a simple spark, an eruption of laughter. It was not a mere chuckle or a fleeting smirk. It was a belly-deep laugh that reverberated within me. The sound itself was foreign to my ears, stirring confusion and exhilaration. At that moment, I felt immense pride swell within me. Soon after, I shed my former self, transitioning from a reanimated corpse to an animated being. My new addiction became growth, and I pursued it with fervor. I constructed a fortress, a barricade to withstand the relentless onslaught of my mind. I tamed the internal chaos that had consumed me, gradually reclaiming control over my destiny. With every strange step, I crawled a feeble yet indomitable way up that treacherous mountain. Knowing I had to venture beyond my childhood home to nurture my emotional development, I decided without hesitation. I relinquished my home to my aunt, packed my belongings, and embarked on a journey to Florida. Florida became my homestead. I found refuge in a vacation cabin amidst the serenity of the Everglades. There were no neighbors for miles around, and the land belonged to a kind couple who were seldom present. The cabin, nestled within a dense, humid forest, provided ample opportunity to confront my innermost thoughts, aiding my recovery. Though reclusive, I reveled in the newfound freedom. The forest around me was a testament to nature's magnificence. It thrived with beauty, teeming with life and vibrant hues. Birds sang, insects hummed, and the sun set gracefully. It was a stark contrast to the desolate nights I had once known. Occasionally, I would venture to an ocean-fed creek a stone's throw away, indulging in peaceful fishing. With each passing day, I slowly fortified my resolve, gathering the shattered pieces of my courage. The journey ahead remained daunting, but still, a glimmer of hope illuminated the path ahead. I clung to the belief that someday, somehow, I would break free from the clutches of this fear. It was precisely what I'd yearned for. My life had become my own again. Though the memories still carried pain, they'd become more bearable. I was on the verge of uttering those elusive words. I am happy. Until the nightly lamentations found me, the anguished cries piercing the silence, a relentless reminder of the entity that haunted my sleep. Sleep became an elusive luxury, for as darkness descended, the wails shattered any chance of rest. Daylight offered a brief respite. The cries became a force that unleashed forgotten pain, shattering the barricade I'd erected. The dormant rancor within me stirred, awakening with a vengeance. My inner turmoil returned, engulfing me in a tempest that left me gasping for breath. My resilience crumbled like sand slipping through trembling fingers. The laughter that once danced upon my lips died in my throat. I broke quickly, so quietly. Then, one night, I stirred from a nap that had inadvertently consumed me. A strange sensation tugged at my consciousness, rousing me from my slumber. The room was shrouded in stale silence, the clock displaying a 1:26 a.m. It was the dead of night, yet mercifully devoid of the haunting cries. With cautious curiosity, I rose from my seat and made my way toward the front door, spurred by newfound audacity. I recall thinking I should step outside, prove to myself that nothing is there, prove the crying is simply in my head. As I approached the door, I envisioned walking outside and wondering where I should go. That night, the air was eerily calm, devoid of the usual bug song. I pressed my face against the small window on the door, peering into the darkness beyond, fully expecting to find only an indistinct shadow. But to my horror, there it stood, staring back at me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. Our faces were separated by a mere fraction of an inch of glass, locked in a macabre face-to-face encounter. A cacophony of screams erupted, shattering the once tranquil air and sending tremors through my home. The glow from the kitchen illuminated his face, etching its haunting contours deep within my mind. His quivering jaw moved erratically, a grotesque dance of opening and closing with each laboured breath. Each exhale birthed a clinging mist, smearing the glass with intricate patterns, forming its surface into eerie artistry. His vacant eyes remained fixed ahead, devoid of recognition, as if ensnared within the clutches of unyielding madness. With unsteady steps, he gradually retreated, his form shrinking into a crouched position mere feet away from my door. There was no denying the presence before me. Frozen in shock, I stood there, grappling with a maelstrom of emotions. Fear, curiosity, and twisted fascination intertwined, forming a turbulent whirlwind of conflicting impulses. Though an unsettling truth settled within me, there was no denying the raw reality of his existence. This was no figment of my imagination. It was a chilling encounter with a realm beyond my comprehension. My scream tore through the air, an instinctual response fueled by primal emotions. No coherent thoughts could encapsulate the overwhelming turmoil within me. Anger, fear, and frustration merged into a sickening sensation that gnawed at my core. I had grown tired of sleepless nights and a life that no longer felt like mine. I had escaped across the country to flee from this. Yet here it was, huddled just feet away, mocking my desperate attempt at solace. It felt like a cruel joke my own mind was playing on me. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice cracking as tears streamed down my face. "Please, just leave me alone." My cries resembled the agonized wails of a wounded and trapped animal, raw and untamed. Outside, the creature continued its relentless screams, rising to its feet again with a disjointed movement. It approached my door, its contorted posture resembling the grotesque position of a late-stage tetanus patient, skin tearing as it leaned. "Leave me alone," I yelled again, unleashing a surge of pent-up emotion that had been dormant for far too long. My pleas fell upon rotting ears that could not comprehend or sympathize. It reached my door. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind. Over and over, I imagined how I would confront and eradicate this embodiment of my deteriorating sanity. I had chosen this entity as the symbol of my mental decline, the effigy upon which my deserved future lay flayed in a blood-eagle-like fashion, offered to the altar of my current reality. Driven by panic and rage, I grabbed the fire axe above my table, my body moving mechanically as I propelled myself back toward the barrier that separated us. A wordless scream of terror, revulsion, and hatred erupted from deep within me as I crashed through the door, my clenched teeth unable to contain the overwhelming intensity of my emotions. The creature was struck by the door, its body forcibly pushed backward, eliciting a feral gasp from its throat. Now, I was determined to end it. "Kill it, kill me, candle, kill." The words reverberated in an unsettling loop within my mind, out of sync with each other, fueling my purpose as I prepared to face the culmination of my anguish. In a whirlwind of uncontrolled movement, I tumbled down the steps, my body flailing as I crashed onto the ground. Before I could fully process the fall, I found myself on my feet, instinctively rising without conscious thought. And there it was, face to face with me, its breath uncomfortably warm and sticky against my skin. The putrid stench of decay invaded my nostrils, causing me to recoil in demoralized repulsion. I felt my courage waver and my resolve crumble. I realized I was not strong enough, not capable of facing this. I backpedaled until I was pressed against the wall of my house. Then, it screamed, convulsed and trembled before me, its milky eyes fixed on an unseen horizon, its hands stretched out, reaching for something beyond my comprehension. With that scream, a surge of courage and rage flooded my being. It was the same as it had been all those years ago in the school, an overwhelming flood of emotions that were not truly mine to feel. It's difficult to articulate, but I embodied those emotions and allowed them to engulf me, to consume me. Kill. The word reverberated relentlessly in my mind. Springing forward with a wild scream, I swung the axe with all my might, the blade sinking deep into its side. The sensation of bone deflecting the force of my strike is etched into my memory, never to be forgotten. Blood and other fluids sprayed from the wound as it took a few faltering steps to the side, pushed by the momentum of my assault. The creature ceased its cries, its tremors, its breath. Time stood still, and it finally turned to look at me. Fear held me captive under its gaze. We stared at each other, locked in a moment that felt like an eternity. Foul breath washed over me once more, seeping into my senses. Beyond that, nothing happened. We simply stood there, locked in a silent exchange. I willed my frozen bones to thaw, my mind transitioning from terror and frenzied rage to something else. It wasn't pride, but rather a different, indescribable emotion. Yet it carried a sense of triumph, I believe. Unbeknownst to me, it had reached out and gently grasped my arm, its touch going unnoticed until it began to speak. "I never meant to scare you," he rasped, his voice torn and ragged, struggling to emerge between shallow breaths. "I'm sorry this had to happen to you," it uttered, its words filled with agony and desperation. Tears welled up in its eyes, a flicker of pain crossing its face as its ragged hand clutched at the axe lodged in its new laceration. "Please, kill me," he wheezed, his pleas reverberating in my mind and reaching my ear simultaneously. With its other hand, it gripped the axe and brought the blade to its neck. "Kill me, Candle, kill now." The final word echoed like an explosion within my head, and his hand pressed against my face. Everything plunged into total darkness for a fragmented moment as I swung the axe. Suddenly, I felt myself hurtling through space, a void engulfing me. The air grew cold, and the wind whipped past, intensifying the disorienting descent. I screamed in a frenzy of confusion and terror, my voice lost in the abyss. Downward I plummeted, faster and faster, the nauseating sensation overwhelming me. Did I die? Is this death? I'm dead. Thoughts of my imminent demise gripped my courage, but I resisted, unwilling to accept my fate just yet. In the distance, far below, a growing light pierced through the darkness. Fresh tears streamed down my face, blurring my vision and making it difficult to gauge the proximity of the light and how much time remained before I would be halted by the unforgiving ground. But it was rapidly approaching. I squeezed my eyes shut, unleashing a scream that echoed through the void. In the face of imminent death, I summoned every ounce of defiance within me. I want to live. The words echoed in my mind, a fervent plea repeating like a mantra. I curled into a protective ball, bracing myself for the impending impact that would mark my brutal end. Seconds stretched into eternity as I awaited the inevitable. Then, with a soft and gentle thud, I collided with the ground, the impact akin to falling off the couch. A feeble whimper escaped me, carrying away the remnants of my shattered pride. Slowly, I uncoiled my limbs and remained still, a mix of confusion and exhaustion paralyzing me. Was this death, or had I somehow managed to survive? At the very least, I was conscious. I reached out with my hands, feeling the texture of the hardwood floor beneath me. I attempted to open my eyes, but darkness engulfed everything, rendering me blind to my surroundings. Rolling onto my back, I extended my arms as far as they would go, searching for walls that eluded my touch, instead only finding a formless nothingness. A new fear emerged as a creeping suspicion arose. Did I even have a face? With trepidation, I brought my unseen hands towards my face, and a sharp sting shocked me as my dirty, sweaty fingers met my open eyes. It burned, and a faint chuckle escaped my lips, mingling with tears that continued to cascade down my face. I released a weak, triumphant sigh, throwing my arm in the air, and darkness claimed me once more, my consciousness slipping away. When I awoke, I found myself in an unfamiliar hallway, illuminated by ethereal torchlight. Glancing around for my position on the floor, I took in the details of my surroundings. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, its warped and aged dark wood floors covered in a thick layer of dust. On each side of me, 2 doors stood, adorned with handles clad in aged bronze. The peeling, curling white paint of doors cast a small shadow that danced in the flickering flames. Ornate red and gold walls framed the hall, extending into the distance without interruption. The air hung still, thin and cold. I pushed myself upright, drawing a reflexive breath just to find that my lungs refused to cooperate. I couldn't draw in the air, an unsettling revelation that further shook my fragile state. Yet, amidst the disquietude, an unexpected acceptance settled upon me. Maybe I truly am dead, I mused while massaging the space between my eyes. And perhaps this is limbo, or some other place beyond the realm of the living. Standing before the doors, I brushed off the accumulated dust as my fingers traced the bronzed knobs. I attempted to turn the knob of the door on my right. It remained resolute, refusing to budge with my attempt. I turned my attention to the door on my left, hoping for a different outcome. Yet, once again, my efforts proved fruitless. The doors remained firmly shut, denying me entry. A sense of resignation settled over me as I contemplated the possibility that I had indeed entered a land of limbo or purgatory, where the deceased wandered aimlessly, seeking answers and respite. If there were lessons to be learned or tasks to be fulfilled, I had yet to discover them. But the absence of purpose, the prospect of eternal nothingness, weighed heavily on my soul. With a deep breath, I made the conscious decision to venture further into the darkness, forsaking the dwindling light behind me. Hours turned into an indeterminate passage of time as I traversed the corridor, my hand trailing beside me against the cold surface of the wall. Surprisingly, fatigue and hunger eluded me, further reinforcing the notion that I probably died. If this was the extent of my existence, an eternal cycle of aimless wandering, I yearned for something more. The prospect of mere nothingness, devoid of purpose or meaning, felt like a reality abandoned by the gods long ago. Determination and desperation mingled within me, urging me to maintain my pace and keep moving forward despite the uncertainty. And then, a sudden burst of light ruptured the darkness behind me, catching me off guard. The icy tendrils of fear gripped my chest, causing me to flail and stumble, my yelp swallowed by the darkness. With a surprising display of grace, I flopped heavily on my stomach. I clambered to my feet and swiftly turned around, propelled by a sense of desperate longing. I hurtled toward the newfound light, driven by an unspoken fear that it would fade if I didn't reach it in time. Desperation fueled my actions as I lunged for the handle of the nearest door, seeking the anchor to halt my momentum. The handle remained steadfast, unyielding, as it abruptly halted my chaotic trajectory. I clutched the doorknob with both hands, pouring every ounce of strength into my attempt to pry it open. I threw my weight against the door, pulled, hit, kicked, and pleaded in desperation. But the door remained unafflicted. Exhausted and defeated, I crumpled against the door, collapsing to my knees. I buried my face in my folded arms, tears flowing freely once again as a sense of hopelessness enveloped me. What was the point? There was nowhere to go, no escape from this damn place. I was trapped, imprisoned within my own personal purgatory. This was my punishment. Reality began to fracture, my veil of ignorance slowly lifting. Could I truly be dead? The realization dawned upon me, shattering the feeble illusion of safety and acceptance. I wasn't okay. I wasn't safe. The weight of my unease bore down upon me, threatening to consume what little resolve remained. In the face of uncertainty, I whispered the truth that echoed within my being. I'm not okay. I rolled onto my side, curling into a tight ball, clutching my legs close to my chest. I surrendered to the oceans that consumed me. I ceased all efforts, resigned to my fate. Time lost all meaning as I lay there, motionless, accumulating layers of dust upon my immobile body. Months, or perhaps years passed in this frozen state. I remained frozen, a monument to despair and defeat. The weight of my surrender bore down upon me, and I grew stagnant in body and spirit. As time passed, a small voice emerged from the depths of my being, offering tiny shards of defiance. It urged me to continue, questioning why I should give up. The relentless nagging of that voice eroded the staleness of my resolve. And so, with great effort, I gave in to the persistent beckoning within. I began to stir, my brittle bones creaking and cracking in response to the tentative movements. Every inch of my being protested, muscles screaming as I defied the platitudes that had held me captive. The desire for something different, something more, ignited within me. It took time, but I managed to rise to a sitting position. My body clung stubbornly to the remnants of my self-imposed stagnation, resisting my will. But I knew I had to move. Just move. I whispered those two simple words to myself, a mantra in the stillness. With each painful twitch and each tear in my flesh, I pressed forward. The blinding light pierced through the darkness, and I quickly shielded my eyes. The hallway, once shrouded in darkness, was now ablaze with a furious glow of burning candles, illuminating every inch of the endless walls adorned with their white doors. Shielding my eyes from the searing exposure, I recoiled from the scorching heat that began to radiate from the flames. I peered through the gaps in my fingers, and a sight greeted me that filled my heart with renewed hope. There, at the end of the hallway, lay an exit. A definite continuation beyond these confines. A rush of motivation coursed through my veins, igniting a fire within my soul. Leaning against the wall for support, I willed my legs to carry me forward, pushing past the pain with each step. The longing to reach that final door consumed me, drowning out the agony. I moved with a shaky shuffle that evolved into a stiff, determined speed walk. In retrospect, I can only imagine the nightmarish image I presented. But at that moment, all I wanted was to reach the end, to embrace the promise it held. With each passing door, I caught glimpses of their numbered plaques. 37, 39, 41, 43. The numbers ascended. I found myself running soon. The blinding light soon seared through my closed eyelids, a symphony of pain. Perhaps I should have gauged the distance to the end, but in my blind pursuit, I collided with the ending wall with a resounding thud. The impact broke my nose, and I tumbled to the floor, disoriented and wounded. As my body sprawled upon the ground, the once illuminated candles in the hallway extinguished one by one, enveloping the space behind me in an impenetrable darkness. Yet, amidst the obscurity, one candle remained defiantly aflame. The candle beside the door labelled 158. Its flickering glow drew my gaze, anchoring me to the present. Candle. The word reverberated within the recess of my mind, its significance echoing relentlessly. And then, like a distant echo from the past, a strained and familiar voice permeated my thoughts. Kill. Candle. It urged, a haunting reminder of the encounters I had faced. The voice, bearing the same ragged quality that had sent chills down my spine before, emerged from the darkness, piercing the silence with its command. A low, ominous rumble stirred in the distance, a sound foreign and unsettling to my ears. It started as a mere murmur, barely perceptible, but gradually swelled in volume, intensifying with each passing moment. The air itself seemed to thicken and vibrate with distraught energy, a growing force that quelled the surroundings. I felt it from deep inside my being. It was the sound of impending doom, a creeping darkness that threatened to swallow everything in its path. As the rumble resonated through the depths of my being, a profound distress began growing within me. It crawled beneath my skin, coiling around my muscles and sinew with a chilling grip. The sensation of impending nothingness clawed at my very core, filling me with a deep-seated dread. It was a fear unlike any I'd ever experienced, a realization that I stood at the precipice of an inevitable and irrevocable end. The weight of this knowledge settled heavily with a visceral stab of anxiety that sent tremors through me. The world around me seemed to hold its breath, as if bracing for the impending collision with an unimaginable force. I stood, helplessly transfixed, caught between fight and flight, a deer in headlights. The rumble grew louder, reverberating with a resonance that shook the very fabric of reality, and it quivered under its weight. With trembling hands, I clutched at the doorknob. My small rattles quickly became me desperately trying to twist it open, but the doorknob remained stubbornly locked. The rumble grew louder as the unstoppable force closed in on me. Panic surged within me, causing me to frantically shake the door with wild desperation. But still, it resisted, unyielding to my futile attempts. The feeling grew ever stronger, and I became ever more frantic. I felt as though I fell into the quicksand of insanity. Kill. Candle. The words thundered in my mind, echoing over the impending roar that threatened to consume me. It was a command, a directive to extinguish the flame. In a moment of clarity amidst the chaos, I realized what I had to do. I reached out, smothered the candle's flame with my bare hand, and at last, the door swung open. I was violently thrust forward, pulled into the void. The deafening roar receded, replaced by a disorienting rush of motion as I spun and flailed, completely at the mercy of another unseen force. Control slipped from my grasp once more, leaving me to surrender to the unknown as I flipped and spun through the void once again. Abruptly, the tumult ceased, and I found myself standing outside my own home, a surreal tableau frozen in time. There, I witnessed the enigmatic moment, a version of myself suspended mid-swing, the axe poised to strike the creature's neck. It was a fractured moment of the reality I had left behind all that time ago, a moment frozen in time and space. Taking a hesitant step forward, I was abruptly hurled back into my own body, the fragments of my existence reuniting. Time resumed its course, and I felt the weight of the axe as it carried out its intended purpose. The blade connected with a solid, metallic impact, tearing a new rift in the fabric of reality. I was again plunged into a jarring darkness. The whirlwind of confusion was the only thing familiar anymore. The musty scent of familiarity, reminiscent of my high school days, filled the air, punctuating the otherwise suffocating silence. In an instant, my vision returned, but this time with a disorienting rush accompanied by dizzying vertigo. I found myself standing in the classroom where my mother used to teach, a place I hadn't set foot in for years. Confusion clouded my thoughts as I turned my gaze to the left. And there she was, my mother, staring at me in disbelief. A collective gasp rose from the students, their eyes fixed upon me with fear and horror. The weight of their stares pressed upon me, making me acutely aware of the unusual circumstances I found myself in. I glanced at my feet in habitual embarrassment, and there I noticed the axe embedded in the gas line, emitting an ominous hiss that sliced through the thick silence. My eyes darted back to my mother, and on a desk, illuminated by a solitary burning candle, my gaze fixated. The word echoed relentlessly in my mind, the significance growing with each repetition. Candle, the candle, the candle. In a reflex surge of urgency, I released my grip on the axe, discarding any semblance of thought, and propelled myself toward the desk. But my efforts were in vain, for as my fingers reached out, a catastrophic chain of events unfurled before me. instant, the classroom erupted in a fierce eruption, an inferno that devoured everything in its path. The sheer force of the explosion shook the very foundation of reality, hurling me against the wall, my body crumpling behind a nearby desk. Charred and broken, my form bore the scars of the blast, yet my consciousness stubbornly clung on. I felt pain unparalleled to any other I'd experienced so far. Amid the chaos, I gathered myself and began to crawl towards my mother's mangled figure. She lay there, torn asunder, yet desperately still clinging to life. With every ounce of strength left in me, I painstakingly dragged my injured body toward her, my movements a testament to sheer determination. My hand reached out, seeking connection, but instead encountered a severed limb. Undeterred, I reached my mother, and she extended her remaining arm, seizing my hand with a desperate grasp. Our bond unbroken, even in the face of such devastation. "Mom," I sobbed, my voice choked with anguish. Tears streamed down my face as I knelt over a broken form. "Mom, I'm sorry," I cried out, my words punctuated by deep sobs. "I'm so sorry, Mom." Her eyes met mine, and in that delicate moment, she mustered all she had to utter a sweet whisper. "I love you," she barely managed, a weak attempt at a smile gracing her lips. But her grip weakened. Her hand slipped away, surrendering to the pull of gravity. I collapsed once more, pressing my head against her scorching shoulder, the flames from her burning clothes licking at my tear-soaked eyes. At that moment, the white-hot pain of loss eclipsed any physical pain I might have felt. The realization struck with cruel clarity. I hadn't succeeded in extinguishing the candle. I had failed once again, repeating the cycle for the 158th time. The weight of my failure bore down on me, crushing my soul into a cloud of fine dust to be carried away with the hellfire that consumed my surroundings. I didn't deserve the reprieve of holding my mother. I needed to escape from the desolation I had wrought. Crawling on hands stained with her blood, I retreated to the corner of the room. My arms hung limply at my sides, my body trembling with a mixture of guilt and revulsion. I didn't want to touch anything, especially not myself. I recoiled from my own skin, my hands the instrument of a demise. I wanted to shed my skin as it pressed this decrepit form even closer to my heart. "I killed my mom," I whispered, the words heavy with self-condemnation. I trembled uncontrollably, consumed by my otherworldly screams of anguish and sorrow that shattered the air. Suddenly, a voice pierced the chaos from behind me. "Hey!" it yelled urgently. "We have to get out! There's a gas leak!" A hand reached out and grabbed mine. As I turned to face the source, a jolt of recognition coursed through me. I was staring at myself, another version of me, but younger. At that moment, I realized with terror that I'd become the embodiment of the nightmares. I screamed a primal cry of disgust and horror, forcing the other me to retreat in a frightened flurry. Days have passed since then. After the younger me fled, I was pulled back into our timeline. This timeline, for the final time. I hope my journey was enlightening, entertaining. I hope you won't stagnate as I did. And if you ever find yourself stagnant, placated, absent, and it's the why that keeps you down. And you should also ask yourself, why not? Your reasons just might be enough to move forward again. I wish I could say that my parents' death had meaning, that they died for a good reason. But they didn't. I was only 11 years old at the time. A drunk man, racing home to catch his wife cheating, blindsided them on a turn. My parents didn't die heroes. They didn't die for a grand purpose. They died because someone took them from me too early. This was the first time I felt real, raw grief. The memory of when I was told, the moment it happened, is snapshot in my mind like a burn that never heals. The way my gut sank like the dip of a monstrous roller coaster. The pit left as my child self realized the permanent nature of it. I can even still feel the tingles in my fingers as the shock set in. The words played in real time, but my body felt slowed. Breathing became manual as my vision tilted over and over. I was not emotionally ready for this. I was barely emotionally handling school, so then being taken so callously left me empty for longer than I'd like to admit. After their passing, my grandparents moved into my parents' home with me. They packed up their lives and tried to pick up where my parents left off. 4 years they tried to connect with me, but I was emotionally unstable. I resented them for trying to take their place. Their love hurt me in ways they couldn't win. They tried to coddle me during and after the funeral. For 4 years they tried to break down my walls, but the walls I built held strong. I sank myself into the last connection I felt I had with him. Games. My father was a software engineer, so he spent a lot of time on the computer, and to my mother's dismay, he dragged me into the digital world early on. I couldn't get the hang of using a mouse and keyboard. I think my hands were too small at the time, so he bought me a console. We would huddle around the TV and play all the best co-op games he could find. While snooping for presents one Christmas, I even found a stack of games magazines, red marker circles around games that specifically mentioned local co-op. This is how he always managed to find the perfect game for us every time. I skimmed over this in the moment, having not found the presents they hid so well. But looking back, my heart breaks knowing how much care he put into this hobby of ours. However, there were times I'd catch him playing games on his own. He was a PC gamer born and bred, so that was where I'd find him playing solo. But he never seemed to put the same energy into finding new games to play. Rather, I'd always see him playing games of pixels and numbers, simulation games from his era of gaming. I'd ask to play too, but he'd always tell me I was too young for these kinds of games, and that when I was older, he'd show me how to play them. This always welled mixed feelings of annoyance in the moment and anticipation for that time to come. But eventually, games lost their luster. No matter how much I played, trying to honor them in my mind, I was now playing solo. Not seeing the screen split with another player alongside me was a constant reminder of the pain. I was almost exclusively brought up on split-screen co-op experiences. I was never into playing without my dad. But that's when it hit me. My father would play solo, but he'd play those weird pixelated simulation games. So I had it in my head that to enjoy those types of games would make me the adult I idolized him as. But I didn't know where to start. He never talked about them, saving that for a time that would never come. His computer was locked behind a password that was forever lost, so I had to find these games myself. I took to the best resource I knew of to solve the greatest mysteries on Earth: Google. I put in buzzwords of what I could remember: simulation games, indie, single player, old, and press search. These words were not very specific, so it yielded a wide variety of stuff, and after hours of scouring each page, I found a forum post about a game someone had made. Even though it was made in recent times, the screenshots they used to advertise it had that retro style I was looking for. But it wasn't just how it looked. Something else drew me to this game, above all the others that had a similar vibe. Its name: Family Simulator. It boasted an extensive game system that you had to manage to keep up an ideal family, something I wouldn't have gone for, opting to lean towards shooters. But it was this dichotomy that made me take the plunge. The instructions were fairly simple for my first time not just popping in a disk. It ran through an exe file that did all the decisions for me. As the green bar filled, a sudden wave of emotions overcame me. My father had always kept me from these kinds of games, always thinking I'd prefer the modern titles he kept up with, so this really felt like a chance to connect with him, post-mortem, no matter how little it was. I launched the game. Initially, I was met with a black screen, and then a studio logo screen. An image of a heart came up, alongside the words Famco. Most likely the game creator trying to get their name out there. Nothing flashy or significant, but charming for something probably made by one person. The title screen faded, followed by a basic text box. A little line flickering, beckoning me to start writing. The question was simple. Tell me about your life. I thought for a moment. I had been asked this a lot, by counselors, my grandparents, and kids that never cared about me before they heard the news. A gesture I dismissed at face value with a blunt, "I'm fine." They should have known the answer, so I felt insulted each time I was asked. After a while, my grandparents were withdrawn about asking this, seemingly respecting my decision of maintaining distance, and yet, for some reason, that frustrated me too. But looking back, I'd never truly thought about the answer above a simple no, much less answered it honestly. I kept all of this inside, and it finally bubbled up to a point, the straw that broke the camel's back. I started typing. All the frustration, sadness, envy, jealousy, all of it was being shoved into this game. Time blurred while I hashed out my rant. I was putting my soul into this answer for the first time ever. It felt silly, even in the moment, knowing I was going at it into some indie game of pixels and text. I didn't know why I was giving this game so much information about myself, but it felt good to get these feelings out somewhere where I knew I couldn't be judged. I could just say my piece and not hear hollow rhetoric about hope and healing. And it felt good. The black box, a silent listener that I needed. Something that wouldn't pity me, but would just listen. I hadn't even gotten into the game and I was exhausted. I had typed out everything I missed about my parents, how I dearly missed the meals my mother would make, my father taking me out to a field just to throw a ball around, how he'd show me neat tricks that would have me belly laughing, the way he would get up 5 hours before any of us to tell us that he woke up early, only to go back to bed a few minutes after informing us. I miss staring at the watch I gifted my mother, with my dad's help of course, that my mother adored when we went out for special occasions, the way they treated me, how much I loved them, how much I missed loving them. Every single minute detail was handed over. The game accepted the information with a satisfying ding sound, and I was sent to another menu. This time, character creation. Now, I've never been the creative sort, so I blatantly just made myself. I named myself Alex, set brown hair and brown eyes, a simple white t-shirt and jeans. I was also prompted with adding personal details like my birthday, number of friends, and my likes and dislikes. What I didn't expect was the choice of a family. It wasn't as in-depth as the character creation itself, only a couple of presets. Preset 1 was a woman with red hair, a simple crop top and some shorts, the man not too dissimilar from my own outfit. Preset 2 was, they looked like my parents. It sounds crazy, but it just felt like them. The models were just a mashup of simple pixels, but they carried so many of their characteristics I grew to recognize in them. The jovial look my mother wore on a near constant basis, my father's stoic stature that exuded the confidence that he was always trying to pass on to me. It was uncanny. I was at a bit of a loss. I knew I missed them, but I didn't realize how much I still miss them. Even after 4 years. I mean, for a second, I'd been convinced that these were my parents in some way. The game was something I was looking to sink some time into as a distraction, but now it fully captured my attention. I accepted all the settings and the game loaded up. It played a scenic shot of the house before fading to me in a room with a family. But as soon as I spawned in, I was shook with a loud bang. I jumped a little in my seat and my heart raced at the fright. "Alex, go to bed. You have school tomorrow. Those games are going to make you sick." It was my grandmother on the other side of my door. I always had my door locked, so this was how she would communicate with me. I checked the time, and it was already 2 a.m. As much as I hated to admit it, she was right. But sleep didn't come easy, with my curiosity swirling around my head about this new game. Perhaps I was mistaken, but the thing I had seen as the game had just loaded in was too much to be a coincidence, surely. It couldn't have been a mistake. The setting was a near-perfect rendition of the house I grew up in, the house I was in right now. The more I thought about it, the more excuses I made to cope. How had the game replicated these things so perfectly? But it was the room that was what I couldn't explain. I saw a dining room, but the details were too familiar. The shade of wood on the square dining table, the layout of the cabinets, the door that led to the kitchen. It was almost entirely the same. It could have been coincidence. My house was a common suburban build, with similar layouts in the rows of houses near me, but it was the layers of coincidences that had me stumped on an explanation. I breathed a sigh of relief as I realized that I was the one that handed details over. Perhaps I really had given the game too much information. This thought didn't entirely settle me, but it eased my mind enough to get some sleep. I rose out of bed with a heavy groan. I looked over at my clock and bolted awake, seeing that I missed my first alarm. I quickly got up and rushed my morning routine. As I boarded the bus, I prepared mentally for another grueling day of education. School was meant to be an escape. At least that's what I was told. A place where you kick back with your friends and get into little adventures, all while building your future. For me though, that couldn't be further from the truth. I was an outcast, no small fault of my own, and I refused to socialize. I couldn't. When I started high school, it was not long after the incident. My only thought was, if only I could speak to them one last time. This floated in my head as my peers attempted to make conversation with me. By the time I realized I'd made myself a loner, the cliques were formed and I was labeled as a quiet, weird kid, a prime target for harassment. Arriving at class, I was reminded of the grim reality I was facing, the thing I had dreaded for a week. Group assignments. I attempted to weasel myself into a group, but of course, Jonathan and his buddies ensured that I would achieve no such thing. The truth was that Jonathan was just as insecure as I was, but the difference was that he projected his much louder than anyone else, and I was the conduit for his emotional baggage. The teacher saw me alone and exclaimed that whoever had no group would take a test instead. He spoke like he was talking to the class, but it was obviously just about me. I sat in the corner of the classroom, away from everyone else. But instead of getting on with the test, I started to dwell on the game again. I could easily chalk everything down to coincidence. But what if it wasn't? Could I speak with them again? The notion was absurd. Thinking my parents were somehow in that game was an impossibility. But with so much unresolved, there was an irrational part of me that wanted to believe it was true. I bombed the test with how distracted I was, and school couldn't end any sooner. But I knew it wasn't over yet. Jonathan had a knack for finding blind spots from authority. Somehow he'd always catch me alone, despite my best attempts at staying within eyeshot of people. Though this sometimes didn't even help when other kids would just turn a blind eye to his outbursts. The only constant was me. A slap here, a slap there. I'd learned to ignore them, but in my already emotional state, I ran, crying. When I got home, my eyes had already run dry. As I entered through the front door, my grandmother greeted me. "How was school today, honey?" she soothed. Despite her soft tone, the sadness quickly turned to frustration. I shrugged her off with a blunt, "It's fine," and I ran past her. Rushing past the kitchen, a glint caught my eye. A watch? I didn't have time to check. I needed to get back on the game. I slammed my door shut and latched the bolt. I booted up the game and was loaded in. It was me, in my own house, with my parents, and it was everything I'd always wanted. My pixelated character walked over to my mother, and as I got close to her, a black square appeared. Press enter to interact. "How was school today, honey?" popped up, followed by a box I could type in. This question again. I'd grown to hate this question. The people I'd asked this never seemed to actually care about my well-being, more so just going through the motions of conversation. But I felt safe opening up in this game. The disconnect helped me disassociate from judgment before, so I wanted to try it again, even if to just vent privately. This is where the game became my escape, another reality where everything was as it was always meant to be. Jonathan keeps bullying me. The kids in class despise me, and I can't even muster up the effort to stand up for myself. Because in all honesty, it's the path I chose. I miss you, Mom. I wish you were here to guide me, to comfort me. As soon as I sent the message, she instantly responded. I see, sweetie. Mom is here for you. Your father and I missed you so dearly, the NPC responded. I felt warm. Those were the words that I had been craving. A craving that my grandparents, no matter their efforts, could never satisfy. The dialogue option disappeared, and with it, so did my ability to interact with her. The sadness lingered over the fact that the interaction was so short, but I wanted to see more. I decided I would take some time and explore the house, and maybe see if I could interact with the father too. I walked down the corridor of my childhood home towards my father's office. A prompt appeared asking me if I wanted to knock on the office door, and I accepted. He called to come in, and the screen faded out and back in to us in the office. In reality, it was now a room full of boxes still unpacked from my grandparents moving in, but here the room was back to life. My father sat at his desk, which spanned the majority of the small office's width. This time, the conversation began without a need for me to initiate any prompts. The words of my NPC father flashed across the screen. Hey champ, everything alright? No text box came up for me to type in. Instead this time, I was met with two choices. Yes and no. After the talk with the mother, I was feeling a lot better, so I chose the first option. That's great to hear, champ, he responded. This made me smile. Though he would cycle through nicknames and titles to call me, champ was sometimes one of them. It might have been added as a cliche, but even as a coincidence, it still made me happy. Then the NPC asked me if I wanted to play ball with him. Even though I knew it was all virtual, there was still a small excitement at the idea of playing ball with my dad again. The screen faded to black, and we were in the yard. We passed the ball around for a few minutes, the game looking like nothing more than a PowerPoint presentation animation. But in its own way, it was endearing. Sleep came easier this time. For the first time in recent years, I was fulfilled, as if I had felt parental connections again, even if only virtually. Still, some unease set in as I contemplated the legitimacy of the interactions I just had. If they were simply the execution of basic code, or something more. In the moment, I was absorbed with trying to connect to my parents, but lying in bed, I was debating whether feeling satisfied emotionally from a bunch of pixels was healthy. The next morning, as I rushed through the house to catch the bus, I noticed my father's office door was slightly ajar. I'm not a superstitious person, but that room was not in use by my grandparents or myself. It was, for all intents and purposes, a storage room. I gently pushed the door open, and the first thing I noticed was that the boxes had been rearranged, as if whoever had moved them needed space for something. Then I saw it. A ball laying in the middle of the room. The moved boxes could be explained away, but the ball being there made my head spin with questions. It looked uncanny to the one I'd just seen in the game, not identical, but too close to be written off. The call from downstairs had me pull away from the scene. I was already running late, and the bus wouldn't wait forever. I gave the room one more look before leaving, the snapshot replaying in my head the whole day at school. Another arduous day of school. More isolation, more pointless assignments, more Jonathan. Getting home couldn't come any faster. When I got home, I tried going straight to my room, but was stopped. My grandmother deliberately placed herself in the way of the stairs, making sure I couldn't get past without hearing what she wanted to say first. "Alex, we worried about you. We thought giving you space to heal would help, but every day you've just shut yourself in your room. I know you miss them. We miss them too." My grandfather stepped around the corner and joined her side. He wasn't on his feet much in his age, having waited for my grandmother to start as he joined. "How can you know how I feel? You're not my parents," I yelled back, my emotional bottle bubbling. To my surprise, this didn't elicit anger from my grandparents. Rather, their faces turned soft. "Look at us, we're old. You don't think our parents are gone too? But you're forgetting something. They were your parents, sure. However, they were our kids, our daughter and son-in-law. We loved them, and every day we hurt without them too," my grandmother soothed. "We raised them good, and we can raise you good. You just have to let us in," my grandfather added. I soaked in what they said, but I closed it off. It wasn't the same. It would never be the same. So, with my eyes welling, I just ran to my room and locked myself in. After sulking on my bed, I was left with silence. I hated being with my thoughts, so I turned to the noise I used to drown them out. The game. It loaded in, and I was back with my family. My mother greeted me, and I welcomed this much better than how I felt cornered earlier. However, instead of a conversation, she simply told me to wait where I was. So my character sat at the table. My father came in and said some comments about work, something he'd always do, regardless of if I understood what he was talking about or not. But I didn't mind. It was always nice to hear him talk. Soon, my mother came back in. Her outfit had changed, a more fancier apparel. Instead of normal house clothes, she wore a red dress and her hair was made up into a bun. Her arms were bare, which is how I spotted something that stood out. In the game, it looked like a few red pixels with a yellow dot in the middle. Unmistakably, a watch. And my heart was in my throat. It was uncanny to the watch my father and I had gotten her for her birthday. Red band with a gold face. It really was them. My eyes balled hard trying to take this in. "We have a surprise for you," she said, and I knew what it was before I saw it. Because I smelled it. The smell of cake wafted in, and I instantly recognized it. A Black Forest Gâteau. The cake she always made me for my birthday. In the game, she pulled it out and set it on the table, candles already set on top. I checked the date on the bottom right, and completely forgot what day it was. I hadn't celebrated my birthday since they passed. My grandparents tried to, but I always dismissed it. It was hard to think of my birthday as a celebration without my parents. A jingle played to the tune of the birthday song, and confetti flew around the room. My parents looked elated as my character blew out the candle, something I wouldn't have been able to do in my current heaving state. But the smell lingered longer than I'd thought. At first, I thought it was my emotions getting the better of me, but there was the unmistakable smell of cake in my room. "Happy birthday, son," they both exclaimed. "We want to take you out for your birthday. Our treat," my mother said. "Pick any place you want. "Where do you want to go?" my dad asked. A text box appeared, prompting me to type in an answer. I contemplated the answer. My first thought was KFC. I know it's cheap junk food, but for some reason it was a bit of a family tradition, though it might have been an indicator of our financial status. But I thought about it more, deeper than what the game was asking me. Where did I truly want to go? Well, the answer would be to be with my parents, so I typed in the place that everyone had told me where they went. Heaven. "That's a wonderful choice, son," they exclaimed. "Grab your things, son. Let's go there," my dad said. Then the screen faded to black, then crashed. My heart raced. No, I muttered to myself ad nauseum. I slapped the side of my monitor, knowing damn well it wouldn't do a thing. I was so close. My heart was set on the idea that I'd somehow see them again. But in the silence, I started to think about it. What if this was something they were telling me? The last thing they were telling me? That like the game, to get to where I needed to go, something had to end. Life is what needs to end to get to heaven, the place I wanted to be with them. I looked around my room, then remembered something. When they passed, I snuck into my dad's office and took his old letter opener, a trinket he'd show off to me to open mail. He sometimes let me use it myself, which my mother didn't approve of. It was too sharp for a child to be playing with. But as I slid it out of my drawer, hidden away from my grandparents, I looked at it. Would it get the job done? I put it down. This was ridiculous. I tried to talk myself out of it, but each rationality was answered with retorts. I was unhappy. I had no friends. I had no family. I was alone. So why not join them? Even if it didn't work, it would put me out of my misery. I stared at the blade, deep in thought, and was ripped out of it with a loud bang. "Alex, can you get out here, please?" It was my grandmother on the other side of the locked door. The shuffling footsteps I could hear catching up must have been my grandfather. They had no idea what I was up to. There was no way for them to know, so they must have been just bothering me. My eyes returned to the knife once more, the thoughts coming back. Yet I was ripped from it yet again with bangs, more of them this time. "If you don't want to come out, can you at least let us in?" This was new. They never tried twice. The door acted like a voicemail. They'd say their message, then leave me to respond to it or not. "Let us in." Those words lingered in my head. I always went to them, but I never let them in. This was my space I'd carved out for myself, and I used it to keep everyone out. This was the choice I had. Go through with a plan to see my parents, or see what they wanted. And it was the hardest choice of my life. The silence of the room weighed down on me, and my breath shallowed. Could I make it quick? How painful would it be? Would I actually see them? But the lingering thought was, if I could do it with my grandparents on the other side of the door. So I went with the second option, to see what they wanted. I hid the knife and slowly unlocked the door. Stood outside were my grandparents, big grins on their faces. "Happy birthday, Alex," they said, enthused. I didn't know how to respond, and they continued. I know you don't like to celebrate, but we have something special for you. Come with us, my grandmother said. So I did, my mind too foggy to do otherwise. They led me to the kitchen, and in the middle sat a cake, an exact replica of my mother's Black Forest Gateau. This opened me up. What? How? How did you? Why? I was too stunned to form a question, too many of them flying through my mind. Remember, Alex, she had to learn it from somewhere. Making this cake for your mother was a tradition that started with me, she said proudly. I got something for you too, Alex, my grandfather wheezed, the walk from the stairs taking the wind out of him. He hobbled over with a box, wrapped in a red ribbon. I looked at it, not having any idea what they could have gotten me. They didn't know me, not in a personal way, to not get me something generic. But I couldn't not open it with them watching me. So I slipped the ribbon off and looked at what was inside. It was something that made my head light from shock, needing to have to sit down after seeing it. It was a watch with a red strap and a gold face. My mother's watch. Is this? I started, not having the energy to finish asking. Yes, after the investigation, the police held onto it for evidence. It took a while to get it back, but when I did, I had it restored to give you on a special occasion, my grandfather answered. I have something else too, my grandfather added. He pulled his arm from behind his back and pulled out the ball I'd seen in the office, like the one my dad used to have when he played with me. I've been practicing some tricks in the old office. Bet you didn't notice. I'm not as good as the old man, but he showed me some of the basics, he smugly announced. He twirled it around and tried to catch it as it span, but it caught his knuckle at a funny angle and bounced wildly away, almost hitting the cake. My grandmother's friendly demeanor dropped as she shot him the dirtiest look at almost ruining the cake, which made me do something I thought I'd lost the ability to do. I laughed. It poured out of me, years of pain leaking as joy took its place. Here they were. They were not my parents, nor could they be. However, they knew that and loved me all the same. They were never trying to replace them. They were just picking up where they left off. And I realized that I didn't have to be alone. And from then on, I always let them in. Participants needed for sleep study earned $5,000, no experience required. I was just your average guy struggling to make ends meet. The bills were piling up. My job at the convenience store barely covered the rent, and my girlfriend of 3 years had just left me for someone with a better future. I felt trapped, suffocating under the weight of my own inadequacies. So, when I was scrolling through job listings on my phone, I came across an ad that seemed too good to be true. It was from a group called Sleep Co. They described themselves as scientists looking to run a study with psychology students for their final year university project. I stared at the ad, my mind turning. $5,000 could solve a lot of my problems. Rent, credit card debt, and even a little bit left over to start fresh, or at least try to. But there were enough horror stories online of false, malicious ads that I had to think about it. I ultimately decided that I have nothing left to lose. I was at rock bottom, so knowing I couldn't sink any further, the only direction was up. I clicked the link and filled out the application. If it was just a ploy to steal my details, then they would struggle to use it as much as I did. What I didn't expect was being contacted a few days later. I received a call from a woman named Dr. Harris, who sounded professional and reassuring. She explained that the study was designed to monitor sleep patterns and improve sleep quality. It sounded harmless enough. Besides, sleep was also on my long list of current issues, so if this could help with that too, it was a bonus on top of the promised pay. I agreed to participate. The study was taking place at a facility about an hour outside the city. Dr. Harris arranged a car to pick me up and take me there. I was instructed to pack a small bag of essentials, clothes, toiletries and my phone. Getting away from things, I hoped that this could be the beginning of something better, a detox from the depths of wallowing I was living in. God knows I needed it. When the car arrived, I was greeted by a cheerful driver who chatted with me during the drive. I felt like I had to relearn how to talk to another human, but I picked up my social skills as we went. Soon enough, I felt a social connection, something I'd been missing for a while. As we left the city behind, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The driver assured me that the facility was state-of-the-art and that many people had previously participated in studies there. We arrived at a sleek, modern building nestled in a secluded area surrounded by trees. It looked more like a high-end spa than a research facility, instead of a cold, experimental lab that I'd imagined it would be. I was greeted by a friendly receptionist who handed me a clipboard with a consent form. I skimmed through the legal jargon. My eyes caught phrases like informed consent, monitoring and potential side effects. Despite a slight pang of anxiety, I signed the form and handed it back, figuring this was just legal mumbo-jumbo that covered their asses. I figured this was my personal risk for such a payout. Dr. Harris soon appeared, a woman in her early 40s with a calm demeanor and an air of authority. She gave me a brief tour of the facility, showing me the lounging area, the cafeteria, and finally, my room. I imagined it to be a cold, sterile room with wires and monitors everywhere, a scientist with a clipboard around me at all times. But no, it was a small, comfortable living space with a single bed, a desk, and a large mirror on one wall. "We want you to feel at home," Dr. Harris said warmly. "If you need anything, just press the button by the door. We'll start the study tonight. Until then, feel free to relax." I spent the afternoon exploring the facility and meeting the other participants. There was Lisa, a single mom trying to save money for her daughter's school fees. Kevin was a college student struggling with tuition. And then there was Mark, a recently laid off factory worker. We all had our reasons for being here, and it was comforting to know I wasn't alone. That night, I was given a set of comfortable pajamas and hooked up to various sensors. Now it was starting to align with my perception of this study. Electrodes were attached to my temples, chest and arms. It felt a bit intrusive, but Dr. Harris assured me it was all standard procedure and that it wouldn't affect my sleep, just monitored it. She wished me a good night and left the room. The first night was uneventful. I had a few dreams, none of which I remembered in detail. I woke up feeling slightly disoriented, but chalked it up to the new environment. The next day, I met up with the others. Most of them related to what I described, and we all figured we were all adjusting to the new stimulus. However, Mark was different. He didn't seem to be taking well to things, saying how they invaded his sleep and he felt exhausted from the study. He must have been very out of his comfort zone. A plus side was that they weren't joking when they said we'd be looked after. I ate like a king compared to my usual instant meals and had so much freedom compared to my dingy apartment. After a relaxing day of comfort, I was ready for the second night of sleep. However, the second night was different. I had a vivid dream of wandering through a dark forest, chased by an unseen entity. No matter how fast I ran or how erratic I made turns, it was always on my tail. Eventually, it lunged and tackled me to the ground. Dreams always feel real in the moment, and I was overcome with a fear of death. In the struggle, I turned and saw my ex's disappointed face. Before I could process this, I jolted up in a panic, back in the facility's bed. I was covered in a cold sweat, the fear coming through my body, but slowly passing as I processed where I was. I couldn't piece together all the details when I woke, the experience having left my mind quickly. Dr. Harris asked me to describe the dream as best I could, taking notes thoughtfully. I was instructed to give all the details of anything sleep-related, so I tried. She seemed intrigued by the details, even though they made little sense to me. Dreams are a natural part of the process, she explained. They can become more intense when your brain is adjusting to the monitoring equipment. I nodded, trying to shake off the lingering dread. After the meeting, it clicked what she said. They mentioned monitoring, which had nothing to do with influencing dreams. As far as I was aware, this was just supposed to study our sleep patterns. But no matter how much I tried to deny it, the dreams only grew more disturbing over the next few nights. Each night, the dreams became darker and more terrifying, more vivid, more memorable. One night, I dreamt I was buried alive, the weight of the earth pressing down on me, making it impossible to breathe. It was too dark to see anything. No light penetrated where I was. I struggled and felt the earth around me loosening. Eventually, I could turn more and more and jostled my way out. And when I looked back, it wasn't dirt, but papers with red headers. Late bills. I woke out of breath, feeling pressure release from my chest as I shot up. Another night, I was trapped in a burning building, the heat and smoke suffocating. I escaped, and when I turned, I saw that it was my childhood home. Though I made it out, the screams from within told me I'd left behind what was valuable to me. I woke up gasping for air, my heart racing. I wiped copious amounts of sweat from my forehead, and when I pushed off the bed to fetch a towel, my bed was drenched too. Throughout the day, I felt a growing sense of exhaustion. The other participants seemed to be experiencing similar issues. Lisa had dark circles under her eyes, Kevin looked perpetually anxious, and Mark was irritable and jumpy. We shared our experiences, finding some comfort in our shared plight. All the while, Mark raved about conspiracy as he did each day. However, with too much lining up with our experiences, he was starting to make more sense. During this time, my mind was foggy. No matter how much I slept, I would have no energy for the day. I could no longer enjoy the parts of the facility that relaxed me before. any thoughts of doing something was overridden by a need to stay stagnant. When I was stumbling through a hallway, I overheard Dr. Harris and another scientist talking. They did so in hushed tones, so I focused up the best I could and hid in place, trying to listen in. They mentioned something about Phase 2 and neural manipulation. My curiosity piqued, and my mind fighting to remain focused through the lingering fatigue, I decided to investigate further. That night, after the lights went out, I snuck out of my room and made my way to Dr. Harris's office. I was wary of footsteps and the lurking scientists who were setting up for work. However, I also had to battle the footsteps that weren't real. My mind was playing tricks on me, an enemy to my goal from the exhaustion weighing on me. My only saving grace was knowing where the office was. It was the room behind where Dr. Harris conducted interviews. She seemed to want to work close to the sources of the information she extracted from us. Inside, I dug through stacks of papers accumulated around the desk, details on each of the participants, including myself. Eventually, I found a stack of files labeled confidential, hidden away. I skimmed through them, and my heart started pounding. The jargon and sciencey words I didn't understand, but I got the gist from the parts I could. These were details about an experiment on manipulating dreams to study the effects of fear on the human brain. The title and logo at the top did not match the advertisement for this place. Instead of Sleepy Co., it was some cryptic symbol with the company's name blotted out. I was sickened, knowing we were essentially guinea pigs in a study designed to push the boundaries of human mental endurance. My mind screamed at me in an I told you so way. I knew I couldn't get out just yet. My phone was still in the room, and all the scientists and workers were up and about. Besides, knowing this wasn't just a group of jovial scientists working for the greater good, I didn't want to try escape unprepared. My best bet would be to leave during the day. I slipped away, back to my room, and a scientist stood waiting, ready to put on the electrodes and wires. I simply laid down and allowed it. After a grace period, I slipped them off and had the most restful sleep I'd had in a while. The next morning, I was confronted by Dr. Harris. She demanded an explanation for why no data was picked up from my sleep. They were thorough on the placement on how the pads were secured, so they knew it had to have been me who tampered with them. The intimidating part was how calm she remained while hitting me with the coldest stare. I was caught off guard, and since I'd just woken up, my mind was hazy for an excuse. So instead, I jumped straight into the accusations. I saw the papers. This isn't some innocent sleep study. You're using us, I asserted. Her face calmed, wearing the confidence of her actions. You signed the consent forms. You agreed to participate in this study. We're simply observing the effects. The effects? The effects you're causing? This is torture, I shouted. This seemed to sadden her slightly, which surprised me. We're close to a breakthrough. You have no idea what's at stake here, Dr. Harris sighed. I did not care for a study, especially since I was the guinea pig. Something to be used for a cause I knew nothing about. So, I stormed out, determined to leave the facility. But when I tried to open the main door, it was locked. Dr. Harris signaled to someone, and they ran off and did something. I picked up what it was as soon as I looked at my phone. The signal bar drained until it was utterly useless. The friendly receptionist was nowhere to be found. It was just the subjects and the scientists. Panic set in as I realized we were trapped. Being captive left me no choice. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. So I was resigned to my room, now under constant watch. They simply told the others that I was being observed during the day to test an anomaly, and the look I was shot told me to keep up with the story. As soon as we were to turn in, the others, who were none the wiser, went to their rooms. My arms and legs were strapped down, making it impossible to take the tendrils of the nightmare machine off. That night, the dreams crossed the line. I was in my room, but it wasn't my room. The walls were covered in dirty handprints, and the mirror showed a reflection that was me, but moving autonomously. Worst of all, it could talk. Its mouth curled up into a knowing grimace and whispered my darkest fears, my insecurities, my past mistakes, all my life regrets, laid out to bear. I tried to wake up, but I couldn't. The nightmare continued, blurring the lines between dream and subconscious thought. When I woke, I struggled against my restraints. The scientists came in and undid them calmly, disregarding my struggles. I stumbled out of my room, seeking help, but the halls were empty. Looking around, the whole facility was deserted except for those working there. The other participants were gone, their rooms packed up like they weren't even there. I felt isolated. It was just me, left to the machinations of these monsters. Desperate for answers, I went to Dr. Harris's office to either confront her if she was there or find any information that could help me. But there she was, waiting for me. "Welcome," she greeted calmly. "Where is everyone?" I demanded desperately. "They've moved on. You're the last one," she replied cryptically. This felt like a mistake, so I sharply turned to run. But she pressed the button on her desk and the door slammed in my face, my nose crunching against it. It must have broken, or at the very least fractured. "I think you're special, Ryan. Your brain has shown remarkable receptiveness to our machine. Your life is so meaningless that you lend well to the escapes of dreams and fantasy." I thought to attack her, or at least go down swinging, but she pushed the button again, and I was rushed by too many people who had gathered on the other side. I was quickly held down, and after a sharp prick, everything went black. I awoke, strapped to a chair in a sterile room, electrodes attached to my head. Dr. Harris stood nearby, monitoring the screen filled with data. This was closer to what I imagined when I first got here. There was a twist of irony in my head that at least my instincts were somewhat right. "This is the final phase," she said. "We're going to explore the deepest recesses of your mind." If what I had dreamt wasn't the deepest, dread filled me, worrying about what would surface. The machine whirred to life, and I felt a tingle of electricity coursing through my body. My vision was filled with rapid, horrific images. My parents' funeral, my girlfriend leaving me, the moment I realized I was trapped here. Everything wrong in my life flashed before my eyes. The pain was unbearable, both physically and mentally, my mind fracturing under the strain. I screamed at them to stop, which only fell on deaf ears. Dr. Harris's face remained impassive. "We're almost there, Ryan. Just a little more." The pain was too much, and I passed out. Yet I knew it was still going while I was unconscious. I could still feel it. I don't remember how long it lasted. When I finally regained consciousness, I was back in my room, the electrodes removed. My mind was a shattered mess, fragments of nightmares bleeding into reality. I stumbled to the mirror, barely recognizing the gaunt, haunted figure staring back at me. The man led me to Dr. Harris, who greeted me warmly and conducted her interview. I just mumbled along, barely answering what she had said. With a disappointing ending, she sent me off to the others. I went out, and there they were. Lisa, Kevin, and Mark. They were packed and ready to go, big grins on their faces. "I'm sad to leave this place. It's so nice here, but I'm happy to get back to my kids," Lisa said, enthused. This snapped me into the moment. Swirls of thoughts and confusion mixing around my head. One of the scientists placed a hand on my back, and I flinched around. He looked at me, confused at my reaction, and held my bag, which was already packed with my things. "Oh, you were late, so I packed everything up for you. Sorry for startling you," he stuttered. This was a far cry from the menacing demeanor they all had and the almost militaristic actions they synchronized with. Dr. Harris approached. "Your sleep was the most disturbed of everyone's. You should get that checked out. I can recommend a facility that specializes in that," she mused. She promised to email me the details and left to return to her office. I just coasted through my goodbyes with the other participants and was let out by the friendly receptionist. I left, floating on an air of uncertainty and dread. When I got home, I was no closer to knowing than when I had left that office. All I knew was when I rubbed my nose to itch it, it stung with a pang of pain. I sat down in my apartment, autopilot landing me back in front of my computer, ready to decompress with whatever entertainment I could find. Anything to get my mind off things. When my email dinged with a notification. It was from Dr. Harris. It was a recommendation for another sleep study. This was headed by a different doctor in a different location. It offered $10,000 for participation, which not long ago would have made my mouth water at the prospect. She noted that they work with people with troubled sleep and that they could go deeper into my sleep to find what makes me tick, which was a disturbing way to phrase it. But what disturbed me most was the header. No facility name was mentioned, but their logo was all too familiar. It was the same one on the notes I found in Dr. Harris's office. Or did I find it? I was still questioning what was real and what wasn't, but it was too much of a coincidence to deny. I instantly deleted the email and blocked all correspondence from Dr. Harris. I'm still haunted by the nightmares. Even without the machine, I still occasionally get vivid dreams of cryptic scenarios that echo my day-to-day struggles. It followed me home, a shadow lurking at the edges of my subconscious. But there's nothing I can do about it. "Hey police, a strange woman gave me nightmares about my inadequacies. Oh yes, I did sign a paper saying they could do it. Why do you ask?" It's preposterous. I can't escape it, and I could never go after them for it. But hey, in the end of the day, at least I got paid.